Hello, everyone. Good
Hello.
evening. Welcome. How is everyone doing tonight?
Anyone have any wins they would like to celebrate this evening?
Feel free to say hello in the chat, unmute if you'd like, share a win, introduce yourself, share where you're joining us from, what questions you have about leverage. Rachel will be monitoring chat for us tonight and making sure all of your questions get to us and everything. We're excited to share with you tonight, but let's get some energy going. That's our favorite part of the night.
Mm-hmm.
How's everyone doing?
Sam Al Hassan, I think we did a call here this past week. Lots of familiar faces with us. Tonight we're going to be talking about leverage in real estate, financing real estate deals. That's the magic thing that really sets real estate on fire. It's not a very interesting asset class on its own, but leverage is what makes it so special. Some of the best leverage you can get in all of capitalism on American real estate.
Yeah. And lots of you asked for a community hour about leverage. That's a topic that has always come up, but I think particularly right now as people are concerned about rising interest rates and those sorts of things. So we wanted to not only cover some basics, but also cover some higher level strategies. So there will be a little bit for everyone tonight. We're going to start with really basic terms and then go all the way to pretty sophisticated cash out refi strategy that we've been using on our assets. And we're going to go a little bit quicker tonight because there isn't as much content to cover. We typically go about 90 minutes or so. We used to call it the community hour, and then we had to change it to the community power hour because we recognized that we were never ending in an hour. So we're going to have a lot of time for questions because we have found that leverage is a place that maybe provides some confusion or complexity, or people aren't exactly sure how it works. Or really what I think we often see is that people, the human mind just doesn't believe that it could be possible to do these things. And so we want to share as many examples as possible and answer as many questions as possible. So thank you all so much for some of you.
Lots of people excited to be here.
Yeah, chiming in. Does anyone have a win to share to kick off our night? It doesn't have to be about leverage. It can be if that's if you have a topic specific thing, but does anyone want to unmute and share a recent real estate investment win? You guys are all so quiet. Our other coaching call that we do during the week, all we do is answer Q&A. So it's just like a barrage, and we have to like end and say like, sorry guys, we can't answer all the questions. We got to go home eventually.
Yep.
That's the private coaching call we have for our students in single family at scale. And it's more of a Q&A kind of deal analysis or walking people through what questions they have, clarification on the course, those sorts of things. And then this community power hour is a little more teaching, but we do love to hear from you guys.
Yeah, we got to hang out in Minneapolis, St. Paul here this past weekend with our kiddos and look at a pretty exciting real estate deal there. And
I actually see Lauren. Lauren is our friend in is it Egan or Edina or Eden Prairie? There's so many E suburbs in Minneapolis, but we got to hang out with her and her husband, Ryan, not this weekend, but the past weekend. And then a couple of weekends ago, talking about real estate. And then we were up in Minneapolis this past weekend too, looking at a deal, and that's been kind of fun.
I just had a call with Ryan earlier today. So he went and talked to a couple commercial brokers and said, hey, if you see anything interesting, big, feel free to send it my way, because I work with some people who are pretty big into the industry, and that's exactly what happened. Seek and ye shall find. So pretty exciting opportunity that came his way. You just have to look for it.
Lauren said driving to gymnastics. I love it. We take our kids to ice skating lessons like proper Minnesotans. And so when we were in this hotel a couple of nights ago, doing our due diligence trip in Minneapolis, our daughter was creating ice skating with soap in the shower, and that was pretty fun. She did have a fall. So I totally get the kid activity. All right, well, let's get started.
Yeah.
We will share our screen to share our slides. Can you all see our slides there? Can someone say something in chat?
Yeah.
Very good.
Awesome. All right. Well, let's get started then. So a little bit about us. Our longtime attendees will see that I finally included a picture of our whole family. So for the longest time, I was using a picture with just two of our children. This little guy that Nick's holding, that's Micah. He's 2 years old. But we just had this really beautiful picture of us that I kept using. And I would always feel like all this maternal guilt, I would say, but we have a third child. And then baby number 4 is in my tummy here. He's coming April 6th.
We may have to sit down at some point.
Yep.
It's going to be a long time for a very pregnant mom on her feet.
Yep. Yeah. We do all of our teaching standing up so that we have the highest energy, but at some point we may fold and sit down. But this is a little bit about us. This is Nick. I'm Elaine. We're a husband and wife real estate team. Some of our stats here, Nick can share with you.
Yeah. So we've done a little bit of real estate sales. We're actually in the top 1/3 of 1% of all the KW agents, which is the largest real estate organization in the world. Part of Gary Keller's personal mastermind, which is a pretty neat honor.
I got to spend about 2.5 hours with Gary on Friday talking about the status of the real estate market, and a lot of that stuff that he teaches, we're just passing it on to you guys as much as possible.
Yep, he sees storm clouds on the horizon, but Gary's always a little bit of a pessimist. I feel like he's a little bit of a realist. But what did he say? It was if you plan to hold for 10 years, then it's always the time to buy.
That's right. And that's exactly what he said.
And he said you should be buying everything you can. It doesn't matter. So I thought those were some very sage words from a person who's rarely wrong in real estate. We've got some assets that we manage there, over 150 million in assets under management. We've raised over 30 million in capital, and we're currently moving forward with our ground up construction project there, Stonehaven Townhomes. We've got all 3 buildings of phase 2 framed up, and there's some windows on them and roofs, and it's exciting to see those things leap out of the ground. It goes so slow at first when you're getting entitlements and permits and getting through zoning and planning, and then
there's a hole in the ground, and you're like, wow, we're making backwards progress.
The framing is definitely the most exciting part when things just kind of come into being, and
it's a lot of fun.
It's been a lot of fun. Yep.
Awesome. Some updates from us. So lots of people have been asking about when we will be launching Fund 2. We don't have anything we can share yet, but we're getting pretty close to a deal that would be about 45 million in size. And so that's larger than we're able to place into Fund 1. And so that would require that we launch Fund 2. We had been messaging to people maybe something like the summer, but then also saying that you just never know with these deals. So we're looking for deals to finalize the placement of capital in Fund 1. But this deal that we're working on right now that we're really excited about would need to go into Fund 2. So nothing signed quite yet, but get on the wait list. Tell your friends to get on the wait list for Black Swan Fund 2. It will mirror Fund 1 almost exactly with a few very minor changes, and could be launched in as little as maybe 2 or 3 weeks.
We'll see. Yeah.
It won't be April 6th. That's the day I'm having a baby. So but it might come after that.
Yep.
We're also really excited about our in-person event, the Black Swan Real Estate Real Life event. This is a long time coming. We really wanted to have this in 2020, but of course COVID came, and so we kept postponing it. That will be here in Rochester, July 15th through the 17th. Rachel will put the link for signing up in the chat. If you register before April 1st, we have an early bird discount, and then also a giveaway for a hotel stay on us. So please register. We're really excited. We've had a lot of folks register, about 50% current investors and 50% new investors. So it should be a really good crowd. We're really excited to meet a lot of the folks who have already invested with us, and then also welcome new faces and get to build this community together. So we're really excited
We're gonna have
about that.
A charter bus. We're going to drive around and see our assets and visit job sites, and you'll get to see a Class C apartment building and a Class A apartment building, and it's going to be a ton of fun, just networking with like-minded people and getting to experience real estate in real life. Like most private equity funds, there's this curtain between you and the asset, and we want to get everyone that's in our fund, everyone that's in our community to come on out and see where putting your money into Main Street actually works. And we think it's just this is how it should be. It's how capitalism should be. So we're really excited to to get everyone together.
Yeah. And you can register after April 1st. I want to be clear about that, but it's very helpful for us as event organizers to get some sense of how many folks are coming. So that's why we're incentivizing some early bird registrations with our discount and our giveaway.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's jump into leverage. So, Nick, I think said the most important thing at the top of the hour there, which is there are few, if any, investments in US capitalism where you can use someone else's money, i.e. the bank, to invest. Long time ago, you used to be able to use the bank's money to invest in the stock market, and that led to the Great Depression. That's kind of an oversimplification, but that statement is definitely true.
They've put a few rules into place since then.
A few. But real estate is such a stable asset class that banks are very excited to lend against real estate. It has real tangible value through economic good times and economic downtime. And so leverage is a really powerful tool that's generally only available to real estate investors. You can't really get leverage for stocks or crypto. You can get leverage for businesses. Of course, that's an active activity. But leverage is really what makes the difference between a ho-hum real estate investment and a really good real estate investment. I loved the graphic we had for Community Hour this month of the deal plus the debt is the magic. And so that's what we're going to talk about and share about here. Let's start with this example here.
Yeah, so very frequently people will come to us and say, hey, I actually had an appointment on Saturday with a client who really, they're selling $1 million personal home that they don't owe anything on. They said, okay, we want to buy a couple of houses with that. And I'm like, well, that could buy you a lot more than a couple of houses. And they're like, no, we'll just own it with cash. We don't get the leverage. And I had to talk through this exact same set of numbers here to help people understand that on its own, unleveraged real estate really isn't that interesting of an investment. So you can see this is a real deal. We closed on this deal, I think 6 months ago for one of our investor clients. And there's a 10% total annualized rate of return and a 6% cash on cash rate of return. Not bad. But these numbers aren't that much more exciting than you could potentially get in the stock market. And it's a heck of a lot more work to have rental property. It's not very liquid. You really need to stay in that investment for several years for it to really produce a significant return. Year one's always a thinner year. The returns aren't that exciting. Those returns get very interesting though when you put leverage in place. So you can see the first scenario there, it's unleveraged. In the second scenario, that exact same property, we get an 80% LTV loan on that property. So same rental rate, same purchase price, everything. Now, of course, it generates much less cash flow. It generates $337 per month in cash flow versus $885. An interesting thing though, your cash on cash rate of return goes up. Why on earth would that be? Because you have less cash in the deal, because you could go buy 4 or 5 houses instead of one house. And those 4 or 5 houses put together have more cash flow than that one unleveraged house. And then the biggest difference, of course, is going from that 10% total annualized rate of return, which is, it's good. Yeah. But not that much better than you could probably get from the stock market or something of that nature, to a 27% total annualized rate of return on a leveraged home. This is not a particularly special deal. This is not a particularly special loan. These are pretty normal numbers, I would say, you should be able to achieve in most real estate markets. If something doesn't have, at least I would say in the low 20s in terms of total annualized rate of return, it's not a real estate asset we're very interested in. And this is just your year one pro forma. It gets better from here. And that gap, that advantage of the leveraged real estate gets bigger and bigger each year versus the unleveraged real estate. So, I was talking to a friend the other day and they're buying real estate in Puerto Rico. And they're like, oh, you really can't get leverage here. It's just not, there's not a debt market here. But I know a guy who can give me a 30% LTV loan at like a 10% interest rate. And it's still, a no-brainer to take that little bit of leverage. Just to give you some perspective on how privileged we are to have such a stable financial system here in the United States and such a stable real estate market that you're able to get such unbelievably good leverage on real estate in the United States compared to pretty much everywhere else in the world. And it's really this leverage that makes real estate such an incredible investment opportunity.
The next thing we wanted to go over is some basic terminology. Before we do that, I want to share this analogy or this example that I've recently been using with people to really hone in on the idea that it's really leverage that creates the magic in real estate investing. And I find that for myself personally, I hope this lands with a lot of you. When I'm thinking about understanding a concept, I like to think about such extreme examples that they're just absurd, because for some reason it helps to like unlock the creativity in my mind. So imagine if someone told you, think of a nice investment property that you know of in your local area. Maybe you're in a cash flow market, maybe you're in an appreciation market, it doesn't matter, but it's a piece of real estate that you think, if I could own that, I know I could make money on that. And imagine if someone told you, I'll sell that to you for whatever the value is, whatever the market value is. Just have that number in your head. I'm going to say 300,000 because that's a number that's common in my market. And I'll sell it to you with a 1 million year loan at 0% interest, 0%, no payments. You should buy that property like all day. They could come to you and say, I will sell you this property for 400,000, for 500,000. But on those debt terms, you should probably buy the property, assuming you can hold the property for long enough that you can get to when the market says it's worth, say, 400 or 500 for my example. The other example, so that's
so it doesn't matter how much you pay for this house, this mythical house,
right?
As long as the terms make it a deal.
That's right.
Yep.
And then the other example would be, let's say that same house, someone said, I can sell you that house for $1, but I'm going to have 1,000,000% interest rate that's going to compound daily, and the payment is due every single day. You can do the math and you can know that that would not be a good deal. You will far exceed in debt payments the value of the home very quickly. So we've taken two very extreme opportunities and coupled it with two very extreme examples of debt. And that shows you how the two together are really what's most powerful. So there's a lot of emphasis in real estate on spending time on finding the deal. That's absolutely critical. But I think the message that isn't shared as much is that it's really only like half of the game. The other half of the game is spending time finding good debt. And it's the two together that allows the highest returns, the best safety, and the best long-term outcomes. So that's kind of what I would. So Nick showed some real numbers, and then hopefully the examples that I just shared kind of land with, those folks that are maybe more story-based or kind of enjoy thinking about various situations there.
And there's no limits to this. So if you're looking for your first real estate deal, it's totally feasible to get like a no money down deal, to get a contract for deed, to get a seller carry. And then we're working on a $45 million real estate deal right now. And we're looking at the debt terms on it. We're like, I think we can get just a little bit better loan on it. And we're partnering with someone who's like just the most incredible developer we've ever seen or heard of. But, I think we might be able to get a little bit better loan, just because that's something that we focus on as much as we focus on getting the deal. So,
So Nick spent like most of the morning emailing all of our bankers to say, we have this amazing project that we're really interested in. The debt's good, but can we make it better?
Yeah. Does anyone want to sell us a $40 million loan? And would they give us phenomenal terms on it? Like, we're not going to figure out how to be a better developer, a better builder than this person, but I think we could figure out how to get a better loan. So there's no limit to this skill. Lots of people focus on finding a deal, but you got to get a good deal on the debt too.
All right, let's start with concept, because I want everyone to feel like they really understand this. And I find that this area of real estate is the place where our human minds kind of tell us it's not possible, or we're not smart enough to understand it, or the math's too hard. And we're here to shatter all of those beliefs. And I hope you'll leave tonight knowing that you can understand and handle these things. So what is a mortgage? A mortgage is a debt instrument where the bank gives you money in exchange for title to the property. So they can foreclose on the property. They have an ownership stake in the property, or an ownership, not stake per se, but an interest, a right to the property. It's the collateral of the loan. And then you are obligated to make some sort of payment structure back to them. That's a mortgage. There are many different types of mortgages, but that's a mortgage. I think everyone understands that concept pretty well.
The French amortage, meaning until death. So if that's not a grim reminder of just how long that amortization period is, let that sink in. I suppose.
I'd love some longer amortization. Sign me up.
I want to die with as much debt as I possibly can.
Get me some 50-year amortization.
You can't take it with you, people.
Yeah. Interest rate. So that's another one that isn't too challenging. Prevailing interest rates today might be 4.5, maybe inching closer to 5, maybe over 5 for investment properties or short-term rentals. That's the amount that you pay per year for the privilege of having that money. Of course, it goes down as you pay down the principal. And so long as you can get a higher return from your investment than the amount that you're paying for the privilege of having that money, it probably makes sense to have that money. So that's the cost of having the money. You can think of it as a pure cost. It should go on your pro forma as a pure cost, but in your mind, you should think of it as opportunity.
Yeah.
This is my opportunity to take this capital out of this project and go put it into the next project so that I can own lots of pieces of real estate instead of just 1 or 2 pieces of real estate. This is what allows you to speed up the velocity of capital, which is a critical piece to financial independence.
Feel free to pepper any questions that you have in here as we're going along. We want this to be interactive.
Why don't you do term for us, Nick? Do term and amortization together, because I think a lot of people confuse those.
Yeah, how long the loan lasts is the term. And then the amortization is the number of years required to pay off a loan. So with a conventional loan, it's typically like a 30-year term and a 30-year amortization. But in the commercial world, they're almost never the same. It's almost unheard of to have a loan where the term and the amortization match. So it might be a 5-year term. So the loan is done after 5 years, and a 20-year amortization. So you've only paid down a certain amount of that debt after 20 years. And there's a lot of good reasons for that. So on a conventional mortgage, the expectation is you're going to buy this house, you're going to live in this house until you die, and you're going to just let the loan pay down. And then eventually when you retire, you'll own the home outright. That will reduce your cost of living significantly. That's just part of the American dream. On the commercial real estate side, because debt is such a critical piece of the puzzle, and because commercial real estate investors hate having lazy equity in a property, once you get to about 5 years on a property, you almost always want to refi. You almost always want to relever. So it's unusual for banks to offer terms on loans much longer than that. So some investors might go out to 7 or even 10 years, but I've really never heard of a commercial loan with a term longer than 10 years, because the assumption is you have so much equity in that property after that amount of time. It would be crazy for you to want to keep making payments on that same loan. You want to either sell the property or refinance that property. So the fact that the lending industry has structured commercial loans that way should give you a hint about just how powerful leverage is. You need to be careful because those loans can balloon at the end of the term if the amortization has not yet expired. And it's something that you want to be mindful of. Make sure that you're going to have plenty of equity in that property. If there's an economic downturn, you're going to have the ability to refinance that property when the time comes.
So the way we structure our commercial loans is we typically have a 5-year term. And at the end of 5 years, the worst that can happen is that the term is extended for another 5 years with a maximum of a 2% increase in the interest rate. And many of our terms just extend for another 5 years. So they're really kind of almost like a 10-year term. Every bank is different. We're going to talk about a commercial loan strategy later in the presentation. But the thing that I want you to understand here that I find maybe newer investors don't understand as much, and I'm hoping to provide some clarification here, is that term and amortization are different in commercial lending. Yeah. And the reason we think of them the same is that in conventional mortgages, like the mortgages that are on the homes that we all live in, the term and the amortization is the same, which is generally 30 years.
Yep, that's a 5, 10, 20, by the way, 5, 10, 20, where the loan will reprice after 5 years. And then after 10 years, it balloons on a 20-year amortization. So that's just a memorable combination of numbers there.
Yeah, so you can like email a commercial banker and say, I have this property at 123 Main Street. I've been operating it as a rental for a few years. I would like to do a cash out refi with a 5, 10, 20 term, and they'll know what that means.
Yep.
Let's talk about a conventional mortgage and a commercial mortgage. So a conventional mortgage is backed by the government, by Fannie Freddie, and it's really designed for owner occupants. It's designed for a typical family to put a relatively small down payment to get into stable home ownership, to have a stable, predictable 30-year plan or potentially a 15-year plan to live in that home and to pay off that home. They are available to investors. Fannie and Freddie allows 10 conventional mortgages per investor. So a married couple could potentially get 20. Years ago, it used to be just 4 conventional mortgages per investor. And then through the crash, it increased to 10 to get more buyers into the pool. But they're really designed for owner occupants and for investors earlier in their career. A commercial mortgage is, you can think of that more as a business product. So you might get a commercial loan if you were opening, say, a lemonade stand or a medical practice or a veterinary practice. You get a commercial mortgage as a real estate investor. They function very similarly to a conventional mortgage in that they're backed by real property. You have a payment plan. The bank puts a first lien position on the property, but then the term, the amortization, the interest rate, and the way they're acquired is a little bit different. And we're going to have a whole set of slides around conventional and commercial mortgages.
Yep.
Another type of lending product is a HELOC, or a home equity line of credit. There are also commercial lines of credit. Those are debt instruments that are not mortgages. They are when a mortgage is already in place on a property, or a mortgage is not in place, but someone doesn't want to get a fixed mortgage product. They want to have the availability of funds. So let's say you own a home that's worth $200,000. You would like to leverage it and get, say, $160,000 out of that home, but you don't really have anywhere to spend it right now today. So you don't want that $160,000 just sitting in your bank account and then you're paying interest on it. A HELOC allows you to sign paperwork with the bank that says when you are ready, you can come and get your money. It's more similar to a commercial lending product in that it's usually a shorter term, usually a little bit of a higher interest rate, a little bit more negotiation. Many banks just won't even do HELOCs on investment properties. Many banks do. Many banks won't do HELOCs, but they will do commercial lines of credit. So I find that this is a place where there's a lot of confusion because there's very few industry standards across the country. But just think of that as a potential type of leverage that you really need to understand. Is that available in your local area? Are there banks that are willing to do a HELOC? Probably about a third of our personal portfolio is leveraged with HELOCs. And we really like them because when we don't need the liquidity, we pay down our HELOCs, but as soon as we need it, we just walk into the bank and take the money out.
Yeah, that's probably one of the things that's most unique about our investment strategies, our extensive use of lines of credit. And over the course of any given year, I'd say we probably save about 50% of our total interest cost on the properties that we have with various lines of credit. So if we had a fully amortizing mortgage for $1 million on these properties, and we were paying interest on that $1 million versus this line of credit where we maybe drew on that $1 million, but only for half of the year, we save half of that interest cost, and it is a very significant amount of savings. Those little slivers of interest expense that you save over the course of a year. Love line of credit products. So portfolio loan, this is something that's a frequently misunderstood topic. A portfolio loan is just anything that the person lending the money to you keeps on their books. So they don't send it away to a secondary market or to another investor. So conventional loans are never kept on the books with the lender who originates the loan. They bundle those up and sell those as mortgage-backed securities to a secondary market. Commercial mortgages are almost always kept on the books. Not always. They can participate out the debt to other institutions. Banks can partner together to share risk or pool risk or to exceed certain lending limits. The government or bank policy might limit the amount that the bank is allowed to lend to one person. Well, if you want to borrow more than that limit, they can say, okay, well, we're going to get these other banks involved, in which case part of it is a portfolio loan and part of it is not a portfolio loan. Or if I was to just lend you some money, then that would be a portfolio loan. If you get a hard money loan, the person you're borrowing the money from almost never actually has the debt. They're typically just facilitating the loan in kind of like a broker. So in that case, it's not a portfolio loan. And the real question there is the person who's originating the loan, the person who's lending you money, how much does it hurt if you don't make the payment? Because that has a huge impact on how the underwriting works. Let's talk about debt funds as well. So this is a really popular topic right now. There's lots of new lending products out there that are all being originated by debt funds. And I don't like new things when it comes to debt. I like old things. New things are a little scary to me. Call me crazy. I've had the privilege to sit in the meetings where these debt funds will pitch to groups of people to invest capital, and these groups are quite predatory. So they say, hey, we're going to go out and put a bunch of money to work, and we get a return on the capital. But what we really want is to get the asset at a discount, whatever the down payment was or whatever equity is left in the asset. Whereas like a community bank or Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, they have no interest in disenfranchising the people that are borrowing from them. So you want to make sure your incentives are aligned with your lender. Anytime you're borrowing from a debt fund, you should be really careful and know that these people want to eat your lunch. They want the property. They don't necessarily want to make profit from lending. And that's why you see 95 or 100% loan to cost loans from debt funds, kind of hilariously aggressive lending terms. You'll see groups in the multifamily space and now groups in the single family space that it's debt fund originated. So you can just do a quick Google on this company, and they might have a public facing website. They might have 10 different public facing websites with various names, but you can with a simple Google search figure out what that originating party's name is. And it's the XYZ debt fund, and you can go look at their investor slide deck and see where they brag about how they're going to take the property from all the people they lend money to.
Yeah.
Stay away from debt funds if you can.
If you're a newer investor, a debt fund is something you just need to know to avoid because they're very risky, and focus on the other things that we talked about there of understanding what is a mortgage, what is an interest rate. There's a couple questions I'm going to answer here in terms of just defining some terms. But if you are a more experienced investor and you're looking for more creative lending options, our thought is that we would likely never borrow from a debt fund because we really want to work with banks that are in the business of lending, that want to partner with us, that if we ever were to hit hard times, they're going to work with us so that we keep the asset, because they don't want to operate multifamily. They don't want to own a portfolio of single family homes. They want to make money on lending their money. And so we've seen, countless examples of banks working with lenders if, say, a borrower dies or there's a default or those sorts of things. Debt funds, it's the exact opposite. They are lending money to folks because they really want what you have, and they are enticing you to default on your debt so that they can get your beautiful multifamily property or whatever it is, because that's a great way to acquire properties in a tough environment. So that's kind of a difference there between what might be applicable to an investor earlier in their career and maybe an investor a little further along in their career that's looking for something sophisticated.
Not all debt funds are evil. I've seen one ever, and they bragged about how they've never had a foreclosure, that they're not an evil debt fund. But just think about it for a second, that they have to set themselves apart in the market by being the not evil debt fund. So not all debt funds are bad, just most of them.
Yeah. One of the questions was, what does a balloon mean? That's an excellent question. So that
big red floats in the air.
You got some balloons over there. So a balloon payment is at the end of the term, whatever amount is left on the mortgage that is due instantly. It's due on that day. The loan documents will say, this is a loan between Elaine Stoggeberg and Rochester Bank for the property at 123 Main Street for $200,000 with a 5-year term. And on March 29th of 2027, a balloon payment is due. And that means that on that day, I need to pay off the entire mortgage. So the investor needs to have a plan to either have paid down the entire mortgage, which is unlikely, or to refinance the property or to sell the property. So that's what a balloon means. It's important to know if your instruments have a balloon, your debt instruments, and to keep very good track of the dates so that you can start making a plan like a year or even 2 years in advance of when that balloon might happen, so that you can make a plan to sell and pay off the mortgage with another bucket of liquidity, or do a cash out refi.
Yeah, lots of good commentary here. I actually really like this concern about what happens when interest rates go to double digits and you have a balloon, or when banks are having difficulty lending. That's something you really need to think critically about. And that ties in really well with the question about what is over leverage. So we think that you need to marry leverage with liquidity. Elaine and I have tens of millions of dollars in debt. And so we have millions of dollars of liquidity, of cash that's just sitting there for no good reason.
No good reason. It allows me to sleep well at night.
Yeah. Yeah. It's always good to have a little bit of cash is kind of the saying in commercial real estate. A good guideline is you should have about 50% of that cash in a line of credit and about 50% of it as cash on hand. And you probably want to have that on deposit with a bank that does not have your lending business, because the bank typically retains the right to impound depository funds if there is an issue with your loan. The whole point of that liquidity is to have it for a rainy day, just in case you need it and you don't want those funds to be impounded. We've never had anything like this happen to ourselves personally. We have seen some of our mentors go through the crash and have some tough times when banks were not wanting to renew loans. And for the most part, I would say that working with commercial banks, they were relatively reasonable. They would not necessarily call the loan due. They would say, okay, we're going to double your interest rate and make you very uncomfortable to stay in this loan, but please get out of this loan as soon as you can. Because if you think about it, banks really don't want to foreclose on an asset. It's so destructive, so expensive to go through that process. They're going to do everything they can short of that to make that happen. And then conventional mortgages typically don't really get into that situation because they're fully amortizing loan products. So it's very unlikely that we will get into double-digit interest rate territory, but it is extraordinarily likely that at some point in the future, lending will shut off for a time. When COVID hit, there were no commercial mortgages to be had for several months. Banks just said, nope, we're going to stop lending. Now, Fannie and Freddie stepped in to inject liquidity into the market, and you could go get those loans in residential assets. That's one huge advantage of apartment complexes and single family homes is Fannie Freddie is always there as a lender of last resort. But at some point, the debt market does go away. That's just how the game works, and you have to be prepared for that. You have to have money set aside for a rainy day.
And I think investors and consumers learned during the crash, and banks did too. Banks do not want to go into neighborhoods and just foreclose on dozens or hundreds of properties. That was not an enjoyable time for the banks. Part of the reason that happened is because banks were offering like 100% LTV or even 105% LTV loans. Like, surely you're going to need some furniture or you're going to want to paint that thing when you move in. So we'll just give you 5% more than it's worth. And so borrowers walked away. They had no reason to fight to stay. Whereas today, for the most part, the most leverage you can get is 80%. So you have a 20% equity stake in that property. You're probably going to fight for it a little bit harder. So banks have learned, investors have learned, and that's part of the reason why we structure all of our commercial loans to have that reset at 5 years so that we have a 10-year runway to work with so that we can see far, we're able to know that if things are getting higher and higher and higher and the interest rate is going up and up and up and up and up, we have 10 years to work on selling the property, doing a cash out refi, or finding liquidity to pay it off. Absolutely something that needs to be talked about is that leverage is power, but leverage can hurt if that power is not handled appropriately.
Those seasons are really short too. That's something that people don't talk about. So the longest period of time between the first interest rate hike from the Fed and the first interest rate drop ever
is, guess how long? Did you put your fingers up?
I don't know if I did or not.
Ask that question again. I'd love to see a couple of people throw.
I phrased it in a very leading.
You did, but I'd love to see a couple people throw some ideas in the chat when Nick's asked this question, because I'll admit that I was very surprised when I learned this a couple of months ago.
How long are interest rates high? How long were those terrible double-digit interest rates? Take a guess.
Does anyone have any ideas?
If the Fed starts raising rates today and they say by the end of the year rates are going to be 2 points higher, and by the end of next year rates are going to be 3 points higher, how long does that high interest rate period last? 4 years? That's a good low or a good guess. 3 years? Any other guesses? 18 months, 7 years?
7 years or 7 months?
I always hear that 7 years is a typical economic cycle. So I figured it was about 7 years. That was the number that I had in my mind.
Yeah. Jim and Jessica say 7 years. Angelica says 1 year. Laura says 10 years. I would agree with Nick. I thought it was more like 5 to 7 years because that's the time frame of a normal economic cycle.
Yeah.
Jennifer says 2 years. Bendu says 2 years.
Yeah. So 2 years. That's the correct answer. So that interest rates were just raised by the Fed means that we're on the clock, that it would be historically unprecedented if 2 years from now, interest rates were not going down, if the Fed was not cutting interest rates. And the Fed's gotten smarter over the years. So they figured out that all they need to do is just say they're going to raise interest rates, and that can make the markets behave the way they want the markets to behave to curb inflation. They don't even necessarily have to raise interest rates. They just have to say they're going to raise interest rates with forward guidance. And so you need to be prepared for those times, but just remember those times don't last very long.
All right, let's talk about the 5 C's of leverage. We'll go through this one a little bit more quickly. That the terms was really good for building a foundation.
Yeah.
So the 5 C's of leverage are character. That's the applicant. That would be you, your credit history. It's really important early on in your investing career to maintain your credit score as a precious part of your investment journey. Don't over leverage yourself for your personal home, cars, boats, those sorts of things. Make sure all of your credit cards are paid. Really guard your credit history as much as you can, because that's going to set the stage for you to get as many conventional loans as possible to start your investment journey. Later on, credit, like the actual number on your credit score, isn't as important because lending is really based on the asset when you're getting into commercial loans, but it's certainly important. If someone has had a bankruptcy or collections or those sorts of things, commercial bankers don't care if you're at a 705 or a 715, but they do look for the big behavioral things like
very insensitive to credit score, strangely.
Yeah, but they do look for things like collections, missing payments, over leverage, and then certainly bankruptcy.
Yeah.
Capacity is the applicant's debt to income ratio. Again, early in your career, you're going to use conventional mortgages where it's just clear guidelines based on Fannie Freddie. Your debts go into the formula, your income goes into the formula. There's a set formula that all underwriters have to use, and boom, that's your number. If you're under that number, you can get approved for lending. If you're over that number, probably going to be pretty challenging to get approved for lending. Later on, that becomes in commercial lending, that's more equivalent to the debt service coverage ratio, which is, can the asset itself pay for its own mortgage? Is the asset generating enough income that it can comfortably pay its own mortgage? What you can do early in your career is keep your personal debt very low. So don't buy the biggest house on the block. Don't have the most expensive cars or several cars. We always thought about basically like,
we're still driving our dual minivan fleet over here.
Yeah.
Got our 2012 Honda Odyssey with a salvage title. So,
Yep. And a broken windshield.
Yeah.
But it was, early on in our career, it was okay, well, if we increase our monthly payment, say $500 per month to buy a new car, or even $1,000 per month to buy a new car, well, that's like 1 or 2 mortgages we won't be able to get, because that debt is like eaten up by the car instead of eaten up by the investment mortgages. And of course, we've been able to get more lax as our wealth has grown. But early on, this is just so important. It's one of the most important things to really accelerate your growth.
The next one is kind of counterintuitive, but the amount of capital that you have has a huge impact on your credit worthiness. The bank only wants to lend you money when you've got plenty of money. When you don't have money, no one wants to lend you money, which is one reason why Elaine and I keep so much cash on hand. We were doing a $10 million deal last year, and the bank was giving me a little bit of pushback on it because it was distressed, as many of the things we buy are distressed. And I'm like, well, have you taken a close look at the balance sheet of ourselves and our partner on this deal? We actually have 8 figures of liquidity. We have over $10 million of cash just sitting on hand right now. And they're like, oh no, we hadn't noticed that. You're good. We'll give you the best possible term sheet. We're not even going to look at, the financials of the property, because you don't need the money. So of course we'll lend you the money. That helps us a lot in our underwriting process to know that you don't need the money, therefore you get it. So it's a little bit counterintuitive, but having cash makes it very easy for you to get credit.
One of the questions, Charlene, I've been waiting, kind of knowing that this was coming up, so we'll answer it here, is how do you determine how much cash to have on hand? That's a very personal decision. Some banks will have a certain requirement that you have to have, say
10%.
10% is a number, 6%, 6 months of all of your mortgages. If, let's say, you have a single family home portfolio, if every single home was vacant all at the same time, could you yourself, with your personal liquidity, pay the mortgages and the taxes and the insurance for 6 months? That's a common one. We like to have a year. I'll be very transparent that Nick likes to have a little bit less. I like to have a little bit more.
Absolutely.
I'm kind of the chief risk officer of our organization. So what we've structured is we keep 6 months liquid in the bank on deposit, and then 6 months available on a HELOC. Now, theoretically, in the event of a downturn or something catastrophic, like say COVID or nuclear war, the bank could just say, well, your HELOC goes away.
Yep.
You can't actually use your HELOC.
Yep.
So a HELOC is a little shakier of a source of liquidity, but it's very expensive to have 1 year of cash just sitting in the bank. So we do 50-50. I've found that a lot of investors do kind of something like that.
Best practice.
My advice is find a number that's within the realm of kind of industry norms. I would say the norms are probably 3 to 12 months. And then pick the number that allows you to sleep well at night. And if you have a partner, that allows your partner to be very excited about investing in real estate, whether that's a marriage partner or a business partner. And that is a very personal decision. But if you land somewhere in there, you're probably going to be okay.
Yep. And I had thrown out 10%. So you should have at least 10% of your largest deal in cash on hand. You should have at least 10% of your largest deal in cash on hand. So if your biggest deal is 10 million, you should probably have $1 million of cash in the bank in order to sleep well at night. And in my opinion, that may be excessive, but we need to know that if the worst thing possible happens to our biggest debt, our biggest asset, we're going to be okay. And historically, that's about a 10% swing. About 10% of that will probably save you from just about the worst crisis that could possibly happen to that asset.
Yep. Collateral is the next C. So that's the asset. That's the single family home or the duplex, the quad, the large apartment building, the office building that the bank says this thing has real tangible value. If for some reason you don't ever give me $1 of my money back, I can take title to this thing. I can take ownership of it and I can sell it to someone else who will also find it valuable and get most, if not all of that money back. Collateral can also be things like your checking account. If you have a very large checking account, some banks will lend against it. For the most part in real estate, it's the actual property itself. And then conditions. So that's the one that's, I would say, most variable, particularly in commercial lending. So what is the purpose of the loan? What is the amount that the borrower is asking for? What's the loan to value that the borrower is asking for? And what are the interest rates? Someone had asked, can you use a HELOC on your primary residence to buy an investment property? And the answer is it really depends on the bank. If you disclose that to the bank, many banks will say, your credit's good. I know your house is valuable. You have a high enough income that I know that you'll be able to pay this HELOC, no problem. I don't care what you use your HELOC for. Go to the Bahamas and spend it all. Others will say, I don't like the idea that you're using this leverage to buy another piece of leveraged real estate. So it's really up to the bank. We're pretty transparent with we walk in with logoed shirts, like they know what we're doing with our money.
We've probably got a couple of lenders on this call.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, the bank does not like to hear that you're going to do a cash out refi of one property to buy another property. The bank does not like to hear that because from their perspective, that means that you don't have skin in the game, or I don't know, it just doesn't, it's not something they like to hear. Now, we're very transparent. That is our business model. And there are many lenders who are very excited to lend to us because they see the value that we create in our business model. And that allows us to do a cash out refi. But there's other lenders who say, you know what? That's just not a business model that makes sense for us. In the case of a home equity line of credit on your personal home, I don't think you really need to have any kind of disclosure from your bank. I think if there's a banker on our call here, a banker would agree with me that that's not a necessary disclosure. But in general, if you're trying to like line up a closing on an investment property refi with like purchasing another investment property, I would not recommend that. If the bank's asking where are these funds going, why are they going to a title company, they're not going to be very excited to hear that you're using a cash out refi to go get more leverage.
I think that as you become seasoned with a bank, that becomes less true. So we have always been very transparent with our banks that was our plan. And earlier on, they were much more skittish about it. And today they're like, well, of course, like what else would you guys use it for? Like, we know you're not, going and buying these fancy vacations or whatever. And we're going to talk about the value of relationships. And that's a big one, is that you keep working with the same bankers over and over and over. So you know what they like, they know what you want, you're able to do deals together. And then a lot of that fear on both sides of the equation goes away.
Lots of great questions.
Lots of great questions. I'm going to kind of pepper them in as we go, but I want to kind of see if there's anything else that makes sense for right now.
We talked about over leverage and holding cash reserves. So if you have a choice, this is a question we've answered before. If you have a choice between getting a loan at 70% LTV or 80% LTV, a lot of people would say that the loan at 70% LTV is safer. We believe quite strongly that getting that loan at 80% LTV and then just holding on to that 10% in cash is far and away the safest possible thing you could ever do. And that's exactly what we do. We try to absolutely max out our leverage on every piece of real estate that we own. And then we just hold a lot of cash in reserve when something does happen. We haven't really had an event like this yet, but eventually we will. When something does happen, we're going to be glad that we had that cash versus having additional equity in a property that's just not useful to us in the event that we need to bail out a property that's caught fire, or there's been an earthquake or some sort of lawsuit or something of that nature.
Yeah, I think, the point of real estate investing is freedom. So that's a big part of the reason why we don't put our personal funds in accounts that we can't access until we're, say, 65 or 57 and a half or whatever the age is, because that's not freedom to me. I want freedom today. And it's the same thing on the investment side. So with my business hat on, my investor hat on, I think, well, I want freedom to use the resources that I have available as an investor as I best see fit. And freedom is cash in the bank. Freedom is not a whole bunch of equity in a property. That's freedom to the bank. That's the bank having more protection, not the investor having more protection. I would rather have more liquidity that I can look at my whole investment portfolio and decide how to best deploy that liquidity, then give that freedom to the bank in the form of additional equity in the property. I want to address, I think this is a good time to address Jenny's question about student loans, because that's going to be
a very common question.
It's going to be a really important question for many physicians or other professionals on this call that have gone through undergrad, graduate school, professional school, medical school. So her question is, any thoughts on dealing with student loan debt? Initially can refinance to 20-year terms with rates of 2%, and then use that money for something else, but then you're stuck with the debt hanging over you and still paying $1,000 to $2,000 per month, adding to your debt to income ratio. Nick's going to have a lot to comment on because he kind of navigated the waters with my student loans. One thing I'll throw out is I really truly believe that we are in an economic place where at some point in the near future, and by that I mean less than 15 years, there's going to be large swaths of government-backed student loan forgiveness. I just think that's where the country is going. And so we hold all of our student loans as federal loans in the event that happens. I think it's so likely that will happen that I'm willing to kind of make that bet. But in the meantime, you do have to have a plan for understanding how they impact your debt to income ratio.
Yeah, so this is something that we really navigated aggressively. So at first, when Elaine was getting into med school, I mean, we both had a pile of student loan debt. We've got so many letters behind our names, it's ridiculous. We actually took loans against our, we had luxury sports cars and stuff like that at the time. We were flipping cars. And it was way cheaper for us to get a loan on a luxury sports car than it was to get a student loan to go to med school. I don't know what that says about economics or society or something, but it was like 6% for a student loan, and it was like 1.5% to get a loan on a Corvette. So we got the loan on the Corvette. But very quickly, it became obvious that getting those unsecured loans, those long-term unsecured loans, were really valuable to us because they gave us the liquidity we needed to make moves, to buy properties, to run our BRRRR business model. And so we kind of pivoted and we maxed out our student loans. Every possible student loan we could get, we took, and we have never paid
federal loans. We never
yeah.
did private loans.
That's right.
That was a level of risk I was not willing to mess with.
Yep. Very, very.
If you need private loans to finish your education, or you already have private loans and you needed that to finish your education, so be it. Figure out a plan. But if you're considering if you're earlier in your career and you're considering private loans, think carefully about those.
Yeah. So we make no payments on our student loans today. We have income-based repayment, and because of our real estate paper losses, technically we have no income. In fact, we lost millions of dollars last year. We're terrible at this business on paper. So we have no plans to really ever repay those student loans, and they might one day be affected by some sort of government amnesty program. In the meantime, it's relatively inexpensive, unsecured debt that just does favors for us. It's at a relatively low interest rate, and we can go use that capital to buy more real estate. We don't even have it on our balance sheet. It's an inconsequential kind of irrelevant form of debt to our lifestyle and from our perspective. I know that's a really unusual perspective. I hope that maybe you find it refreshing or enlightening. And if you think it's crazy, then feel free to disregard it. I know that for many years, Elaine, student loans were an emotional thing
Oh
for
yeah.
you. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And I think the promise was one day we'd have enough money in the bank that we would be able to just pay off your student loans. We'd be able to just stroke a check. And fortunately, we're in that position today. I don't even know how many student loans we have. Let's say it's $500,000 or something like that.
Probably pretty close.
Yeah. We could just stroke a check. And you know what? The moment you have the ability to do that, those student loans, they lose all their power. Like who cares? Like we could pay them off if we, wanted to, but we choose not to. We're empowered to make that decision. And so that's our approach.
They were harder to deal with when we were doing conventional lending. And then when we switched to commercial lending, the bankers don't care about it. If anything, they're like, of course you have that much student loans, you're a physician. But earlier on, when you're doing conventional lending, you're absolutely right. That's going to bog down your debt to income ratio. So for us, that meant that we lived in a very modest house. Our mortgage payment was like 5% of our income. We drove cars with no payments on them. I do want to speak to Nick's thing about the luxury cars. That's probably confusing if they were like, we don't ever have debt on our cars. So we had a car dealership for a while. That was our first foray into entrepreneurship. So we would sometimes lend to ourselves our nicest vehicles for like a year or so. And
I like having a nice car.
And drive them around.
I wish I could have a nice car right now, but I've got too many babies.
That's how we handled student loans. Very good question there. Let's go over to our next slide, which is conventional loans. So these are the strictest underwriting. They're regulated by Fannie and Freddie. You just need to know that those are government bodies that are meant to support owner occupants. And if you understand that, you understand the extreme majority of conventional loans. Investors can use them up to 10 per person or 20 for a married couple. In practice, I don't think Nick and I have ever met a married couple that gets to 20 because the underwriting gets so complex, the debt to income ratio gets so high. But theoretically, a married couple could get 20, and they have the best terms because they're meant for families to buy homes, to live in those homes for decades, to raise their families there, be parts of the community, work, go to school, those sorts of things. So it's typically a 30-year term, a 30-year amortization. There's also like 15-year mortgages. And then the best LTV. Nick wrote 75 to 80% loan to value. That's on the investor side. On the owner occupant side, it can be as low as like 3%. But 75 to 80% is what you're going to see on a conventional loan. As an investor, if you're just getting started, this is going to be what you want to use because it's safe, it's easy. You can get it from any bank out there for the most part. And it's very easy to understand because you probably have some experience with a mortgage on a home that you live in now or have lived in the past.
Yeah, it's important to understand that Fannie and Freddie are in the business of promoting home ownership and stabilizing the U.S. housing economy. So in the 2008 crash, they made it easy to get investment loans. And then in the period thereafter, they made it even easier to get investment loans. And then recently they've tightened that. They've raised rates. They've reduced the availability of those loans to 7% of the loans originated by any individual loan originator. And I suspect that they will continue to tighten that product. So a couple of years ago, we were recommending that all of our investors get conventional loans. These days, we really don't recommend our investors get that many conventional loans because Fannie and Freddie has tightened that, and people, they think that Fannie and Freddie's job is to lend money. No, it's to promote home ownership and promote stability in the U.S. housing market. So I think that from a policy perspective, you're going to see more and more efforts to kind of squeeze investors out of the single family housing market. And that could be a legislative thing. It will definitely
maybe
be
it'll go back down to 4 instead of 10.
Yeah,
4 per person. Yeah,
I think it would be very likely you could see a reduction to 1 or something like that.
Could be. Yeah. So a conventional loan strategy for today is get as many as you can.
They can't take them away.
Get them separately from your spouse. So every state is a little bit different in terms of property rights for married couples, but in the extreme majority of states, say Nick can have the mortgage, but together we can own the home so that if he were to die or something like that, I still have an ownership right to the home. Just work with your state, your title company, and attorney. It's very easy to do. You just have to tell the bank and the title company that that's what you want to do. A lot of people talk about quitting their job as quickly as possible. One thing that Nick and I did that we share with as many people as possible is to make sure that as you're making a plan to exit your stable employment, that you first get as many conventional loans as possible. Because once you shut off that income source, your debt to income ratio is going to be way skewed because your denominator has just gotten way smaller. So we like literally structured several of our conventional loans.
We closed like 5 loans
like
the month before I quit.
Yeah. So
all in my name.
Be thinking about that. If you and maybe you have a spouse and you're thinking about one of you cutting back, put as many conventional loans in the spouse who would like to cut back first in their name, and then move over to the other party and get as many loans with them. Conventional loans are better for single family than multifamily. The way Fannie Freddie prices them, they give penalties for multifamily. They're also better for purchase than for cash out refi. Fannie Freddie gives penalty interest points for a cash out refi. So the best way to use a conventional loan is for your first investment property that's a single family home, that you get the debt in your own personal name, but if you have a spouse, you own that property together.
Yep. Lots of good notes on conventional mortgages.
I want to go to commercial loans. I feel like that slide's a little out of place. So let's jump over to commercial loans, which is kind of investing 2.0. This is really where the at scale piece comes from. Nick and I, particularly me, had years of fear about commercial loans, that they were too hard to understand, that the interest rates were higher, that we'd have these terrible balloon payments that would submarine us. It was like playing with fire. And then we figured it out. And then we're like, wow, like if only we had figured this out sooner, we would not have had, number one, delayed growth, but more importantly, all this scarcity in our mindset that really like slowed us down emotionally.
Well, our very first investment property, we got a commercial loan on it because it was too small to get a conventional loan. It was worth less than $100,000. It's hard to get those properties originated for an investment conventional loan. And so we went through the commercial lending process, and it was tough because it was our first investment property. So they sit down, a skilled loan originator is just going to say like, hey, have you ever defaulted on anything? Well, how close have you come? And like, how good do you think you really are at this? Like, they grill you. It's unpleasant. Very different from a conventional underwriting, kind of procedure. And then we successfully originated that loan. It was great. And I said, okay, let's go do another one. They're like, that's not really how it works. We need you to go do business with other banks and go get more properties and then come back to us, and then we'll give you a loan. And I'm like, this is the most insane thing ever. We're never getting a commercial loan ever again. And that really did hold us back for a while because we just didn't understand the game.
Yep.
Commercial loans are very relationship based.
We're like, we went on a first date with you and we love you, and you're telling us to go date other people.
We just got through the hard part.
This is so confusing. So we just stopped for years.
From their perspective, by the way, from a commercial lender's perspective, it's a portfolio loan. They keep that loan on their books, so they don't want to have too many eggs in one basket. So one of the first things we always ask a commercial lender is, what is your lending limit, and how excited are you to lend on this asset class, and how excited are you to lend to us? They also have allocations that are portfolio wide. So they, as a bank, can never have more than 20% of their debt outstanding to residential, 20% to triple net commercial, 20% to resident or to industrial, agricultural, right? So you might just be there on the wrong day of the week where they're at 21% residential. It doesn't matter if they love you, they're not going to write you a loan. So there's just different rules that these commercial lenders follow. There's a lot of similar rules, but each bank is different. Some banks, it's like, yep, here's the so-and-so that can make the decision, and that's it. Other banks, there's a 7-tier lending committee that you need to go through. It's more fun to work with the banks where there's just one decision maker. So you just have to go talk to a lot of bankers, and you'll figure it out very quickly. And it's going to be different in your area than it is in our area. It's hyper local, and they'll make up a lending product for you if you want. In Oklahoma, we could get a lending product for a BRRRR loan. So they could do a construction loan. They would close on the distressed asset using an as complete appraised value. There'd be one origination through the whole process. It was a custom made commercial lending product just for a BRRRR investor. No such product exists in the state of Minnesota. And then the state of Minnesota, it has a mortgage registration tax. There's an additional tax for getting mortgages in Minnesota, which is terrible for us. But that makes it really impractical to have certain types of lending products. So, and I was just visiting a developer in Tennessee, every property he has, it goes into a revolving line, and he's got $50 million of real estate in that revolving line. Well, you can't do that in Minnesota because of the tax law here. So, we can't necessarily give you the exact formula for your exact market, because your market's going to be different than our market.
Yep.
But we can give you kind of the overall structure of what this looks like. Yeah.
Yep. A lot of people will ask, I want a referral to a commercial lender. And the answer is, as you're driving to the hospital or taking your kids to school or whatever it is, just have your eyes open for those small regional banks. In a lot of ways, the smaller, the better, because it's often just like one or two decision makers. That's where you're going to get your commercial lending. So I can't tell you living in Nashville or Atlanta or Chicago or wherever most of you are probably listening from California. That's where a lot of our investors are from. I can't tell you where to get a commercial loan. I can tell you where we can get commercial loans, and the investors that we've worked with here in Rochester, we've helped those folks get commercial loans with our local lending contacts. But you just have to look for the banks, and you'll be surprised when you drive around how many small banks there are, and then just build relationships with them.
And it's hyper local. So you might go to a bank, and I remember we were getting loans for our townhomes in Byron, which is 10 minutes away. I mean, Byron is closer than some parts of Rochester. And we're talking to a bank, and they're like, well, that is the next town over, so I don't know if we can lend there. And we had to get out a map.
Like horse and buggy.
Yeah, we had to get out a map and show them, hey, we're actually closer to the property than other places that I know you have loans on. And they're like, okay, yeah, I guess we can loan on that.
Yeah.
So it is it's that colloquial. So you just have to go meet lenders and get the best possible terms you can.
Yep. Commercial loan strategy, you typically start these a little later in your investment career, after you have some conventionals, you've built a resume as an investor. It allows you to scale, work with as many bankers as possible. Don't be afraid. Think of this as building a relationship. If you go into that phone call, I hope it's a phone call, only do email if you have to, but if you go into that phone call, face-to-face is absolutely the best, or that email with the idea that you're just there to shop a product, it's not going to work. You need to build a relationship. And particularly the people that are listening here, you're likely high income professionals. You likely have some investment experience, or you're soon to have some investment experience. You're likely well employed. You have connections, you have credit, you have capital in the bank. Build that relationship with them. They want to do business with you. That is how these people make money, is by selling loans. So it's a mutually advantageous relationship. And I just really encourage you to shed any mindset about anything around that this is too complex, or I'm not worthy, or they won't want to invest. I wish someone had told us that all those years ago. And now we know it. Now we know to just show up and try to get a face-to-face meeting if you can. If not, at least a phone call. Really only do email business if you have to. That gets too logical, too transactional. You really want to build a relationship with them. And when the time is right, the debt will appear. So we literally build a relationship with a banker for a while, and they had all of their money locked up in farmland. And then one day we had lunch, and the banker said, we weren't expecting this, but Mr. Farmer passed away. And so the family has decided to sell the farm. And so we had $50 million of debt paid off in the last month. We're ready to write loans. And we're like, oh, we're ready to buy some loans. And we've been ready to buy some loans for a year from you, but you weren't ready. We just kept building a relationship. It's a lot like a friendship. If you're oh, we can't do business together, there's never any chance, you're going to run out of options very quickly. But if you just stay in relationship with these people, this is what will really allow you to scale, and what will really unlock the power of leverage to really get to even beyond financial freedom, thinking about things like legacy projects and intergenerational wealth. It's all around commercial lending. Small banks are the best. Get a referral if you can.
So someone who's already doing business with that banker, with that individual banker, if they can get, go have lunch together. These bankers, by the way, they would love to buy you lunch. They get to eat lunch themselves if they take a client out. It's one of their key performance indicators, is how many prospective clients have you taken out to lunch this week? So go get a steak on their dime and see if they want to write you a loan. And They are praised if they take people out to lunch and don't sell them a loan, because that means they're being discriminate in lending to only the right people. So just go meet with bankers, and they're a wealth of information. They're going to be transparent with you if you're transparent with them. They're going to tell you why they may or may not want to lend to you, and they're going to say, hey, you may not want to tell someone you've never done this before. Like, I appreciate that transparency, but that's not a good part of your pitch. They're gonna help you out, and maybe you'll do better for the next pitch around. Just know that it's just like finding a deal on a property.
Absolutely.
And we find some of our best deals these days from bankers, because we go to the bankers and we say, hey, how would you like to sell a loan? Well, you got to find us a property before we can buy a loan from you. And then it's your business to lose on the lending side if you can give us a decent term sheet. So these bankers, they know, they have a book of business. They know people who might want to sell, and they can reach out to those clients and say, hey, have you thought about selling to the Stoggenbergs? Because we'd like to keep that business in-house.
Yep. Have a credibility deck. That's literally just, you see our credibility slide at the beginning of each of our presentations. So we might extend that into like a 5-slide deck of who we are, what our professions are, what our education is. I find that it's really helpful to have a personal touch around family, hobbies, anything that makes you more than just a set of numbers. And then just own your experience. When we look at our early credibility decks, we're like, we have 7 single family homes and we've done 100,000 of renovations in our career. And today I think it's cute, but at the time that was the truth. That's what we had. That's what we were able to lead with. And we got deals, and we're still doing, debt with those banks today. And our credibility slide looks a lot different. And because it's relationship based, they love to see us grow. We love to keep working with them. But don't be ashamed of wherever you are in your journey about your credibility deck. Your credibility deck can be your professional experience. If you have 0 properties, I'm going to hit some questions here of times where it might make sense for folks to get a commercial loan as your first lending instrument. Maybe you have 0 properties. And so you're going to lean on things like, I've done this many years of schooling. I won these awards. I have
an MBA.
Yeah, I have an MBA, I have an MD, I'm a dentist, whatever it is. I've had these leadership positions in the community or my profession, anything that shows that you are a trustworthy, stable individual. And then have your personal financial statement and some tax returns available. That's really like step 2. I think maybe someone's honking. If someone can,
that's in real life.
That's in real life outside. That's kind of step 2. Get on the phone, get to lunch, build a relationship with these folks, and then they'll ask you for the numbers, and then you can give that then. A couple of questions I want to address are, when should one think about transitioning from conventional to commercial loans? So for the most part, you want to get as many conventional loans as possible before you transition. So it would really be when like you max out your debt to income ratio, or if you have phenomenal W-2 income, you've hit the 10 or the 20 that you can if you're a married couple, but get as many conventionals as you can early on. Crystal asked, as a newbie investor, can you search for the best loan terms without repeatedly running your credit? Transiently lowers your score. So that's really more on the conventional side where they're pulling your credit. I find that to be like really blown out of proportion. So Nick and I probably have had our credit run, I mean, no joke, like 2 or 3 times per month for the last 10 years, and it has never impacted our ability to lend. Bankers are able to see the pattern. They're able to see, oh, you're shopping for a mortgage. And then there's some things in the algorithm being like Equifax, TransUnion, where if you have your credit pulled multiple times in like a 30-day period, it's aggregated all together. But for the most part, that's just not something I think people really need to worry about. I think that's really blown out of proportion in kind of media or normal talk. And then
I really like this question. What's the best way to build these relationships if you're an out-of-state investor? So I've got bad news for you. Bankers do not like out-of-state investors. And the reason for that is because the only way to lose your job at a bank is to write a bad loan. You can phone it in, you can show up late and leave early, you can never sell a single loan. But if you sell one loan and it's a bad loan, you're losing your job. And there is a massive correlation between failed loans and out-of-state investors. That's just the reality of the situation. I'm sure you've heard Elaine and I, speak with a little bit of incredulity about the prevalence of out-of-state investing these days. And I'll tell you that it's very easy to get a loan with a bank if you have a referral from a local operator. If you have a referral from a local operator. So if you have a local property management company, they probably have relationships with commercial lenders. If they're smart, they do. And those bankers love it if those people are bringing in clients all the time to buy loans from them. So your property manager is almost certainly a licensed real estate agent. They're probably buying and selling investment properties that need loans. And one of the reasons why we're able to get such favorable terms on our loans is because bankers know that we come with a huge book of business, that if you take great care of our clients, we're going to bring you a lot more clients. The bankers do not want to see someone call with a area code on their phone that's not the local area code. You're just not going to get your foot in the door that way. It's a hyper local thing. But if I send an email and say, hey, Joe Banker, we've done business together on 20 loans with out-of-state investors that I represent as a property management company. You visited these properties. You know that we take phenomenal care of them. It doesn't matter that they're out of state because there's a local boots on the ground persona taking care of that property day to day. Would you like to sell them a loan knowing that they're my friend? They'll absolutely sell you a loan. It's very much a relationship-based thing. And they'll even come to me and say, Nick, we went and drove by these properties. These don't look like they're maybe up to your standards. Are you sure these are a safe bet? I mean, they will ask us to vouch for that person or that property, or say, Nick, we can't reveal anything about their financials, but their financials aren't as strong as maybe your typical investor. Are you sure that we should be writing you this loan? It's a, they think of it as writing us the loan, as us vouching for that person. If that person didn't make their payment, we would get a call and say, Nick, the renter's making the payment, right? You're giving them the money, right? Why aren't they giving us the money? Fortunately, that's never happened, but that's how relationship driven commercial lending is. And that's what it looks like even at the high scale. If you're doing $100 million loan, it's the exact same conversation.
Yep. So if you have some out-of-state properties, you're going to want to ask your local team for their contacts, and then you're going to want to build relationships with those bankers. Ideally, you'd fly out and meet them. If you can't do that, a Zoom meeting, if you can't do that on the phone. So what we do is we facilitate that introduction. And to be clear, none of our investors have needed to fly out. If it was a larger deal, they probably would. But we facilitate the introduction, and then from there they build the relationship, and then we're just kind of there reminding them that our property management company is taking care of everything, that there are local eyes on the asset, kind of everything that Nick was describing there. So you'll want to do that with your local team.
And by the way, we don't get any referral fees for this. That's illegal. That would be a RESPA violation. Yeah. As a licensed real estate agent, we're prohibited from collecting any sort of referral fees or kickbacks for lending relationships.
Yep. Joanna asked, what should newly self-employed investors do to get mortgages if you don't have 2 years worth of tax returns with your corporation? So the answer to that is commercial lending.
Yeah. That's
so a lot of the folks on our team are real estate agents. They're younger folks, and they're kind of on the fast track.
Very young.
Very young. Some of them are in their early 20s.
May not yet have their first tax return
or their first alcoholic beverage.
we were trying to help them get a commercial loan, and again, we facilitated the introduction. Normally, this person would not even be able to get a meeting because they just look so young, and we facilitated the introduction. They said, "Okay, can you give us your personal financial statement and 2 years of tax returns?" And he's like, "I've never filed a tax return before. How do I give them?" They're just that young, so. We were able to help them get a loan, a very favorable loan, as a matter of fact. Again, just with that personal relationship, we made it clear that this person's kind of under our wing, and we're going to make sure this project was a success. And this person is getting a paycheck from us, so he will have some way to pay that debt. And yeah, it was a great success. Commercial lending, if you don't have 2 years of tax returns, there's really no way around it.
Commercial lending, help them understand the picture. What was your previous profession? Why did you leave that profession? What savings do you have? What things like retirement accounts do you have? Do you have a spouse that works? What is your investment plan? Do you have another business? Just really help them understand who you are, why you're making the financial decisions. If you're newly self-employed, you likely believe in yourself. You likely believe that you have the potential to earn more income doing whatever you're doing than whatever traditional employment you left. And so you need to help the banker understand that. So that's the beauty of commercial loans. Is on the conventional side, we'd have to say, well, I guess you're waiting for a few years. Yep. So that's one type of hard, right? Is just wait out the clock. A different type of hard is like solving the puzzle of maybe you set an appointment with a commercial banker, 1 or 2 per week, every week until you hit 15 in your market. I'd bet you $100 you'll find 1 out of 15 that takes a chance on a newly self-employed person that has some passion, that believes in themselves, because they'll see themselves in you, or they'll see a different investor in you, or something like that. And they'll say, this typically doesn't meet our underwriting, but I really believe in you because you believe in yourself.
Let's speak to that for a moment. So being small and being new, it doesn't have to be a bad thing. So Elaine and I are locked out of doing business with most banks because we're too big. As soon as they see the deals we're doing in our balance sheet and stuff, they want to be the stronger party in the transaction. And they say, we're really sorry, we don't want to lose your business, but you're just too big for us. So the size of the bank has a huge difference on what they're able to do. So banks have a charter, and community banks and credit unions and stuff, their job is to make sure that there's enough money in Main Street. And these people, they care about doing the right thing. They want to sell you a loan. They get a commission when they sell you a loan. It's their job, but they want to do good for the community. And there's plenty of banks, I could name off half a dozen in our area, that there's like one or maybe two locations of that bank. So there's no stakeholders anywhere that need to vote on a loan committee. Like, you walk in and you talk to the bank president and you shake their hand and they say, yep, this is a person that we believe in, that we really want to support in our community, that we want to write a loan on. This is why our whole, business, this is why we have a charter. This is why our bank exists, is to serve people like this. So just find a really small bank. The smaller, the better. Go pitch to several of them. And it's not going to be a very formal exercise. It's going to be a much more interpersonal exercise.
One of our loans was literally a family-owned bank. So very, very small. And they quite literally said, we are lending to you because you remind us of younger versions of ourselves, and we just believe in you. Very little to do with underwriting, spreadsheets, numbers. They just saw themselves in us. They saw these young entrepreneurs that wanted to do deals and wanted to do business, and they knew that that's how they had built their bank. They own a very successful industrial business that's probably, 40 or 50 years old, that has generated enough money that now they own a bank. Those banks exist in every community. That is, they might be unicorns, but there are lots of unicorns out there if you really look for them. A couple other questions are, can you talk a little bit about how multifamily investors can source loans other than a broker? I've been holding back this question because the answer is build these relationships. So 100% of the debt that Nick and I have is with small, local, regional banks.
At this stage of the game.
Yep. We work with brokers. We're building those relationships because to get to, say, that $50 million, $100 million mark, we likely will need to work with national brokers. But you can get really far with local relationships. And to date, we have not found that the terms that we're able to get with a broker are better than what we're able to get locally because of the relationship aspect. And I'll let Nick speak to that because you work a lot with our brokers.
Yeah. So a loan broker is just like a real estate agent. So they go out, and instead of you having lunch with all the bankers, they go out and have lunch with all these bankers, and they try and find the best loan for you. And you typically compensate them. Let's say it's a point or 2 points. So if you're getting a $100,000 loan, you pay them $1,000 at closing for the service of finding. Unfortunately, that gives you some convenience, but at the cost of not going through the exercise of building those relationships. And it's such a critical skill in the real estate game because the debt is everything. So that's why we don't really recommend that you go out to loan brokers. You certainly can, and we have used loan brokers in the past, and they can get you loans that you may not be able to get yourself because they know everybody, and there's no way for you to know everybody. But man, missing those conversations, there's no way we'd be getting deals from our bankers if we were using a loan broker. There's no way that the banks would be bringing us deals to buy if we didn't have that close, tight-knit relationship.
I actually did misspeak. I said that we've never had debt from a loan broker, and that's not true. I'll circle this back to Crystal's question too. So we have a $10 million project in Tacoma, Washington, which is out of state for us. So we have a local operator, a local construction company, a local property manager, and then we had a local real estate agent and a local loan broker on that deal. And that's what allowed us to penetrate that market. Today, when we do a second deal in that market, we will likely be able to go directly to that bank and say, hey, we've been lending with you for, a little over a year now, or a little less than a year. We'd like to do another project, but we needed to build those relationships. And so we have used a broker before. I want to make sure I clarified that. And then Jen asked this question, which I love. Thank you so much for sharing this, because I find that when we as investors together talk about very specific deals, that's when we all learn so much. So I appreciate you throwing this out there. She says, I bought a single family home in Texas last year. I ended up buying it with cash because appraisals were taking 2 months to schedule and cost $2,000 and I needed to close. Very common situation, especially through COVID. Appraisals were taking forever. So many investors chose to close with cash in order to get the deal in the first place. I bought it with money I had from another property I had just sold. So I did a 1031. I'm having trouble refinancing it. All my cash is tied up in this property and I want to get it back out. Good. That's good that you want to get your cash out. You recognize that your money is in money jail and you want to get it out as quickly as possible.
Money jail.
My debt to income ratio is high. I have no tenant in place because the house is being renovated. Love to hear that you're renovating, but you're absolutely right. That's going to create some problems with lending. Well, I have to show 6 months of rental income to refinance. What else can I do? This is holding me back from other investments.
Jen, how high is your DTI? I don't know if you're able to put in a chat what your DTI is, or if you even know what your DTI is right now. That'll give us some indication of if you're kind of on the bubble there for getting a conventional loan or not. So, you know, the obvious answer, you may have guessed it by now, is you could go get a commercial loan, but you can probably get a conventional loan. So this is an interesting artifact of the underwriting process. On your taxes, historically, hopefully you're running a loss on your rental properties. So each rental property tends to drag down your DTI. The more rental properties you have, the harder it is to qualify for a conventional loan on another rental property. On new ones that are recently placed into service, typically, there's a little bit of variance, but typically, as soon as you have a lease agreement, it's counted as 100% income, 100% income. And you can say, oh, I self-manage and there's no maintenance expense because I do some of my own maintenance. And I just did this big rehab. And they don't really do a detailed pro forma the way a commercial lender would when they underwrite that property. Again, they're just kind of plugging some numbers into a formula. So one thing we figured out is that as long as we doubled the size of our portfolio every year, we were and filed our taxes late, we were able to kind of beat the formula, so to speak, on conventional mortgages. And we got up to a decent number of conventional mortgages and stayed above that DTI limit because they were counting like 100% of that income on our new properties just by having the signed lease agreement, not looking at our historical tax returns where there'd be more expenses or paper losses mixed in there. And that could help you out there.
Yeah, you said lenders are telling me my properties are liabilities, not assets, because they don't bring in much cash flow. Are those conventional lenders or commercial lenders? That sounds like something a conventional lender would say, because that's kind of true.
Feel free to unmute if you want.
Yeah.
Not sure. We've got a full house tonight, so I'm not sure where you are there.
Yeah, while you're considering unmuting, I love just diving into deals if you want to here. So for Jen, who asked a question, Jenny asked a question about student loan debt. Joanna asked a question about newly self-employed investors. A couple other people asked some questions about being an out-of-state investor. One of the options that you have, which isn't as good, but is better than nothing, is a low LTV commercial loan. So a bank may not be willing to give you an 80% loan to value commercial loan or even a 75% loan to value because of various things that you've said there, whether for one person it's student loans, or the other it's that your house is half rehabbed, or the other it's that you're newly self-employed, or whatever. Maybe they're willing to do 70% or 65%. And that's not something to jump up and down and be super excited about, but it gets you in the game and it keeps you going and it speeds up the velocity of your money and it builds a relationship with that bank. So those might be solutions to many of the different problems that have been presented this evening. Get that 65 or whatever percent it is, negotiate, really show them why you are a stable, trustworthy borrower, why it's a safe bet for them to give you, a more normal LTV, which would be like 75 or 80%. Get the best you can get, and then just keep moving. Deploy that capital into the next asset, start paying that mortgage, build that relationship with them, get out to lunch with them a couple of times over the next several quarters, and then just keep going. And then these problems that look like huge obstacles will just be in your rearview mirror. You'll be building a relationship with that bank, kind of like what Nick shared with our first bank. Once you've done business with one bank, the other banks are more willing to do business with you. So our very first commercial loan was a 65% LTV, which today
we were happy to get it.
Yep. I mean, we were like jumping up and down. We did it. We did it. We did it. And today we'd be like, well, no, thank you. We'll go work with our.
And here's how that was calculated, because I gave them very detailed information on just how much cash we'd put into the property. We bought it for 35,000. We put 17 into it, so we were 52 all in, and it appraised for like 85,000. But I'd given them like all the receipts, everything. I was so proud of myself and all the value we created. And they're like, okay, so we'll write you a loan for like 52,000 then. And I'm like, that's not fair. That's not how that works. Like, we create all this value. And they're like, yeah, well, we're not going to give you more money than you put into it. That's crazy. And they ended up giving us a loan for like 57,000 or something like that. Again, it's a negotiation, and I don't know, I think they were rooting for us, but they were like, yeah, it's like a 63% LTV loan or something. It was a ridiculously low LTV loan because we had created so much value, and they didn't want to give us our cash out of our first investment property. So, just lesson learned, don't necessarily, give the bank that information out of hand and help them make a bad decision.
Yep. Let me see what other slides we have here. Really, we wanted to hit on commercial loans tonight. That was our big goal. And hopefully it's valuable for you guys that, we're answering these questions.
Yeah, there's a story we hear pretty much every day, which is someone goes and gets a loan for their personal home. They have a great lending experience with a conventional loan originator. And then they go get an investment property loan from that conventional loan originator, and they have a great experience. And then they get another one, and it's kind of tough, but it's okay. And then they have another one, and it's a nightmare getting to closing, just like Jen was talking about. And that conventional loan originator says you can never get another investment loan again. And that investor internalizes that and doesn't realize there's whole other worlds of lending out there. And so the person who sold you a loan on your personal home is probably not the best person to talk to get a loan on your investment property.
Yep. If you leave with one thing tonight, I hope that it's an educational piece. I hope that we have given you a lot of technical knowledge that you can use to implement this strategy. But maybe we've been too confusing or whatever, and maybe you've been bathing your kids or working on dinner or writing up notes in the hospital and you haven't quite focused on the technical piece. If you leave with just one piece of information, know that Nick and I have like 88 mortgages. Like, it can be done. I promise you, we are living, breathing proof. We are also not the only people we know that have that many mortgages. You just have to believe that it's possible. Keep finding the right team players, keep trying, keep building relationships, and know the players. Like Nick said, a person who writes conventional loans for owner occupants is probably going to tell you something very different than a commercial lender who's used to writing business loans and agricultural loans and real estate investment loans. It's just a very different mindset. One isn't better or worse than the other. It's just that's their profession. One profession says that's not possible because they don't have that tool in their toolbox, and the other says, come on in, I do this all day long. You need to find those people and build relationships with them to really scale. I want to talk about this slide, and then we'll go.
This question right here.
Yeah, let's talk about this slide real quick, and then we can answer questions until 9 p.m. Central. But this is our last slide that I really want to cover because people are asking a lot of questions about what about rising interest rates and why would I refi right now? I know I'm sitting on
terrible time to get debt now, right?
I know I'm sitting on all this equity, that I've accumulated over the last several years, but gosh, I have a mortgage at 3.0% or 2.75%. And the best I can get right now is, 4.25%, 5%, very legitimate questions. We continue to refi. So we are refining 3 apartment communities and like 30 single family homes right now. It does take more care and precision than it maybe did a year ago when debt was just so cheap. You'd get any debt the bank would give you. So I want to talk specifically about financing in today's climate with rising interest rates.
Yeah, so you definitely need to act quickly. Rates are going up. They're going to keep going up. There's no doubt about that. By the end of this year, rates will probably be a full point higher than they are today. So if you have an opportunity to refi, you need to do it right now. I mean, you need to do it a couple months ago when we recommended that you go refi right away. And the Fed is not mysterious about this. They have forward guidance. They say, here's what we see right now. Here's what we think we're going to do in the future. Here's what we think the markets are going to do in the future.
The Fed never wants to disrupt. They never want any of us to wake up in the morning and surprise, there's an interest rate increase. That is not what the Fed wants. The Fed wants slow, steady, predictable.
Yeah. So if you just, and it's not mysterious how these rates work either. So I'm a big fan of Y charts. You just go to Y charts, 30-year mortgage. How about that?
It's like you've clicked on it a bajillion
Yeah,
times.
it's like I have, like I check it every day. So as you can see, rates have gone up a little bit. They were 3% back in January, and now they are 4%. That is a massive difference. This should not have surprised anyone because the Fed said, hey, we're going to stop buying mortgage-backed securities and we're going to let the rate go up. So we should be totally unsurprised that something like this has happened. You can also look at like a 2-year treasury.
Rachel, can you put that in the chat? It's Y, just the letter Y charts. 30-year mortgage and Y charts 2-year treasury. That's helpful links that that can help people guide their decision making. So
this is you can look at like 2-year treasury, 10-year treasury, and this is going to have a huge impact on commercial lending rates. So you can see we're at 0.8% or something like that back in January, and now we're up to 2.3%. So we're seeing a 1.5 point spread. And that's exactly what we're seeing now. So back in December, we locked in a 3.0% commercial loan, an outrageously favorable loan. That same loan today, well north of 4%, perhaps 4.5%. So none of this stuff is mysterious. And there's lots of great projections out there. Like interest rates are surprisingly predictable. You just have to kind of know how they're driven. And it's not truly any more complicated than what we're sharing with you here. I mean, go ahead and join these community hours. So I remember a year ago, Fannie Freddie said that we're going to start taking investors out of the market. And so we're going to raise rates on investors. We're going to limit them and that sort of thing. And we said rates are going to go way up. And a couple of months later, rates went way up, like 1.5 points overnight, just like, we said they would, because that's what Fannie and Freddie said would happen. We said other lenders will probably move into that gap now that's been created by Fannie Freddie. There's going to be more lenders in that secondary market, more debt funds, that sort of thing. And it's probably going to take about 6 months. And that's exactly what happened. So that following fall, you were able to get debt again on investment properties at a reasonable interest rate from other lenders, non-Fannie Freddie lenders. This stuff is relatively predictable. A good hack that I recommend, let's say you have debt on an asset, on a single family home or an apartment building that's at 3% because you got a great loan back in the day. You can get a second mortgage on that property. So you don't necessarily have to refi and forfeit that really juicy debt that you have, that first position debt. You can get second position debt on the asset. It may be at a lower LTV, or ideally, you can get it with the same bank, and then they'll usually give you a pretty good LTV on it. Could be a HELOC. A lot of banks won't do that, but a lot of banks will. You just have to ask. Or if you have a commercial mortgage, we're doing this on many of our properties right now. Mm-hmm. We just get a second commercial mortgage on it. That's a second lien position. And that even helps us in the state of Minnesota because we have that mortgage registration tax. So we don't have to pay tax to re-originate the mortgage.
And the bankers love it because they already are holding the debt on the asset. So it does increase their risk for sure that they're giving us cash out of the deal, but they already have the deal. They already are seeing our financials. They're already seeing the financials from the property, and then they get to sell another loan. So they personally get another commission, another piece of income.
Yeah, there's lots of kind of maneuvers that are available to you here in the commercial loan space, and that's one reason to dive in if you're not there. If none of this stuff looks interesting to you, if you're not in a position to do a refi like right now, again, the longest period between a tightening and an easing cycle is only 2 years. So just target a time 2 years from now. This is a common question we get of, how do you orient your business plan to a rising interest rate climate? And interest rates won't be rising 2 years from now, statistically speaking. That would be, historically unprecedented if that was the case. We need to be careful and make sure that we are prepared in case there is something historically unprecedented that would happen. But it's unlikely. It's unlikely. Now, if our business plan called for us to refi 1 year from now, that would be very bad. And all these things are exceptionally predictable.
It's our goal to do that, but there's nothing that legally or financially obligates us to do that. So our goal is always to refi as quickly as possible to unlock the capital to go on and do the next thing. But we really target an indefinite hold period and refi at the most appropriate time in whatever place we are in the market cycle and that particular property's life cycle. If there's been a big renovation or a big change in management practices, we love Warren's quote of buy something you'd be perfectly happy to hold if the market shut down for 10 years. If you look at any given 10-year period, if you can meet that window, you'll be okay. If you're planning things like a flip, or you get yourself into a cash flow negative situation, and then you also find yourself behind on equity, it's going to be really hard to stay motivated if you're getting neither cash flow nor equity. So as long as you get good, high quality cash flowing assets that you plan to hold, then you can use all of this leverage, make good decisions, increase the velocity of your capital, and then just keep going. And then there's all sorts of other reasons why we love an indefinite hold. We really think that folks that hold properties for a long time are great for themselves. They're great for the community. They're great for the people living in those properties. We really cringe when we see like large multifamily communities that are just transacting every 2 or 3 years. Like, that's not good for the people that that live in those communities. It's not good for, you know, the surrounding communities. So there's all sorts of reasons why we love an indefinite hold period from a like an ethical perspective, but from a financial perspective, it is just a rock solid business plan. And then there's also huge tax advantages that when you do a cash out refi and you get that money from the bank, that's a completely tax neutral event to the IRS. So if you get a check for $100,000, $100,000 goes into your bank account because it's debt, it's not income. Whereas if you sell the property and you get a check for $100,000, there's likely going to be depreciation recapture, some sort of capital gain, or you'll need to do a 1031 or some other maneuver. So the IRS prefers a long-term hold period. And when you couple that with a cash out refi, you get the best of both worlds.
I'd like to talk through two kind of concrete examples of this principle at work right now, because this might seem a little abstract how we're saying that you can kind of predict interest rates and everything. So we have one asset that we bought last August. And so we've only had it for like 9 months, but we've increased the value of that asset like $5 million in that time. It's just been an out of the park home run success. So we're doing a cash out refi on it right now, which is normally crazy because the bank does not like to give you any kind of cash out refi until you hit that 1 year mark. So we just went to the bank and said, hey, we'd like to do a cash out refi before rates go up. What can you do for us? So it's a $10 million property. It's now worth $15 million, and we should be able to get a full cash out refi on it and then some. But the bank has some limits. They really, really, really hate doing cash out refis that quickly. And so we're going to get about $500K out of that asset. Now, normally, like, we wouldn't do that. Like, that's just not something that would make sense. Let's just wait and get all of our money back out 3 months from now. Well, 3 months from now, interest rates could be a point higher, and maybe it won't make sense for us to do it. And we got it as a second mortgage. And maybe several months from now, we get a third mortgage that's at a 6% interest rate or something like that. And then we wait. And then we wait for 2 years for rates to go back down. And it, you know, maybe we have to wait to get all of our cash out of that property. Maybe we get most of it out. Maybe we get some of it out. And then another example I'd throw out there is like, we're looking at doing some new development deals. So we're looking at building some apartment buildings. Someone approached me wanting to invest in some new development land for build to sell homes. And I got to be honest, I wouldn't touch that with a 10-foot pole. In an escalating interest rate climate on a build to sell business model, there is so much opportunity for you to be left holding an asset that you can't sell, that's not generating income, that's severely cash flow negative. Like, there's just no way I would touch that asset in this climate. We know that interest rates are going to go way up. Do you sell more new homes or fewer new homes when interest rates go way up? You sell fewer homes. And it's probably going to be a bad time to be developing new lots during that time. So, you know, just a little bit of
a lot of this is like fundamentals.
Yeah.
Like it's
this is not
like
clever.
Understanding the ratios and the relationships is more important than understanding the actual numbers themselves. Of course, we want you to understand the actual numbers themselves, but first you understand the relationships. Just like, you know, way back when we learned what a fraction is, we first learn it with, you know, little physical pieces of wood that we're moving around in, you know, say first or second grade. Once you understand that, then it's very easy to understand what 1/4 means or 2/4 or whatever. Same thing here. Understand these fundamental relationships, and then knowing like the actual numbers to put into your pro forma and what to put into your amortization calculator and all of that, that becomes very easy. The relationships are the foundational piece.
Yep.
I'll end here with, again, some of our reminders, and then we'll do questions for about 15 minutes. So we have our event coming up. We'd love to meet as many of you as possible. We're really so excited about that.
Unlimited Q&A.
Unlimited. Well, let's limit it to 12 hours per day, because I will have a 3-month-old baby at that time.
The baby will answer questions.
The baby. we're very excited. So that's in July. We have our early bird discount, which is $50 off per ticket. And then our hotel giveaway if you register before April 1st. We're really excited about that. We've priced our tickets really low because we really just want to get as many folks here as possible. The ticket covers all of the event, all of the property tours, all of your food and drinks, including all of your alcoholic beverages. We really just want to get people together. We're so excited. Kind of things are finally settling down with COVID. Please, everybody cross their fingers that the new variant is very mild. And so we're excited. And then blackswanfund2.com, you can put yourself on the wait list to be amongst the first to know when we launch that. And then with that, I will end our presentation and we will do some questions. I saw, I think it was, who has their hand up? I can't see it here because I can't find it. But if you have your hand up, unmute. I'd love to prioritize your questions so that we can kind of make it interactive.
Hey, Hassam here. Thank you for your presentation.
Yeah, are you able to turn your video on?
Sure, I can do that.
Yeah, let's do that and kind of make it more like a Q&A. Good to see you.
Same here.
What's your question?
I just want to clarify about the point about high interest rate and then the cycle of 2 years. Do you mean like just jump in and then you always have opportunity in 2 years to be in a better position with your interest rate? Because right now, for example, I had a rate of 5.1, which is high. And when I run things in the calculator, it does probably cash and cash is about 2 or 3% less, say to 3%, which is a few months ago. So it's not in a favorable position, but still I want to make I want to take an action. So I just wanted to clarify your point that you have mentioned.
So your question is, do I do a deal if the cash on cash rate of return is say 3%, but that's the best deal I can find given the deals that I have available to me and the debt that I have available to me?
No, let me clarify. Sorry. So yeah, I want to clarify a point you have made. So it's not necessarily a question that's related to me, but I'm just reflecting on current situation. That's why I'm more curious to clarify the point you made. Is did you mention that whatever the situation right now, you always have a chance to have a better rate in a cycle roughly every 2 years? So that's a chance for you to do a refinance at that point. You mentioned something about along those lines like 5 minutes ago. I didn't want to interrupt.
And that is that looking at history from the time rates start to go up until the time rates start to come down, that's about an 18-month window. Is this a property that you currently own and you're doing a cash out refi, or would this be a property that you would acquire?
No, it's a property that I want to acquire. Now, I understand your point. Thank you for your answer. I understand that overall picture should look with a positive cash flow. It doesn't matter. I mean, it matters if the higher cash on cash, but what matters is that you're making positive cash flow. So right now I'm in a situation when I'm looking at a single family home, and the rate that was given to me, the most favorable one out of 2 lenders, was 7.1 for an investment property. I think if I want to do a residential or a personal, it would be a half a point less, but that's not my intention. So what I'm seeing right now in my market is at best at 3% cash on cash with such rate, with the listings I've run my calculation on. I mean, I could go for another 2 weeks on it on the rest and kind of validate this.
At one point you said 5.1, and then at another point you said 7.1. Is it 5.1 that's the interest rate that you're getting quoted? Okay. What market are you in?
5 point. Houston,
Houston. Okay.
Texas.
What's your hold period?
What do you mean?
How long will you own this property?
I want to own it as long as I can.
So you have no
Buy and
need
hold.
to sell it in a few years. There's not like a kid you need to put through college or a thing that needs to happen in, say, 3 years that you have to sell this property. You can hold it for, say, 10 years. Okay.
Correct.
Is it in a high quality location?
Yes.
Is it a high quality property?
Yes.
Then you're probably in good shape. So you have a cash flow property in a good location. It's a good property. And we know it's a bad interest rate potentially, but it might be better in the future. So the deal can really only get better. And I promise you, your future self will thank you that yourself today bought a property. That's just how the game works.
Yeah. So I don't know much about Houston. We've never invested there, but I know that Houston is growing. I know that Houston has good jobs. You're telling me that it's in a good neighborhood and that it's a good, solid home. So it's going to have some perennial value that people will want to rent it. And there will be more people coming into that area because Houston is growing. 5.1% in the grand scheme of interest rates is not that much. And I think we need to remember that, you know, in our lifetime, interest rates were double digits. You know, someone called out, well, what about times when interest rates are double digits? So the money is still very, very cheap. Some of our very early investment properties, we were at like 5.5. I think six. I think we even went up as high as to like 6.5 at some point in our investment career.
Yeah, that very first investment property was 6.25 or something like that.
Yeah. So what I hear is that it cash flows. It's in a good neighborhood. It's a good home in a growing area. And we can project that interest rates are not going down in at least the next year, save something, you know, catastrophic with the war or something like that. So it's unlikely that you'll be able to get a better deal on debt in the next year than what you have in front of you right now. You can hold it for a long time. And what you said kind of earlier in the question here was, don't let me misquote you, but it was something to the effect of, I want to get started, right? So it's unlikely that interest rates are going to go down for, say, at least a year and probably closer to 18 months. Do you want to sit on the sidelines for 18 months? Or do you want to get a cash flowing property, deploy your capital, and then you might be well poised that, say, 18 months or 2 years from now, when interest rates go down, the value of that property has gone up. Maybe you've done some improvements to it or even just maintained it really well. You've had a nice rent roll over the last couple of years, then you can refi it. So the you 2 or 2.5 years from now, when interest rates are likely where they are now or going back down, is happy that you own this property that today gets you at least a little bit of cash flow, provides some security, and has the potential for upside. So Warren Buffett says the best investment is one that has stable, predictable returns and has a potential for upside. That is your deal. Is it a home run? Probably not. Maybe, because Houston is such a growing area of our country. Maybe it's in a great part of Houston with new schools and new parks and new restaurants, and it's really going to experience, you know, accelerated appreciation. But it's probably at least a good base hit that isn't going to get you into trouble, because you can hold through any changes in its value over the next many years because of that cash flow, and it's in a good neighborhood, or it's in a good kind of overall metro. If you said you were in an area of the country where we know there's net population decline, or you're in a kind of a tougher neighborhood with crime or those sorts of things, we'd probably say, there's reasons to run from that. But you've got lots of things on your side. Get in the game, get going, and then plan for a refi, say 2.5 years from now. And hopefully at that time, the value has gone up and the interest rate is a little bit lower than it is now. More importantly, you have experience.
Yep.
You're very welcome. Thank you for asking the question. I love it. I love to see you guys face to face. A couple other people raise their hand. I'd love to do another live question here.
Yeah.
Unmute yourself. One question I want to answer really quickly while we're waiting on someone to unmute is, Marie asked, does a second mortgage count against your 10 conventional limit? So a second debt instrument is not going to be another conventional mortgage. It will be something like a HELOC or a commercial loan. I don't think I've ever heard of someone having two conventional mortgages on one piece of property. So no, that you could have property A that has a conventional mortgage, and that counts as one of your 10,
Not after 08.
and then a HELOC. So you have two debt instruments, but only one is a conventional.
All right,
Wanted to throw
Charlene,
that
what
out
do you
there.
got?
Charlene, what do you have? You
Hi
want to turn
there.
on your video?
Hi.
Good to see you.
Yes. Hi. Hi. Okay, Nick, I have a question for you. When you started this talk, you said you had a client who had $1 million asset on equity, and they wanted to sell that and buy two $500,000 properties for all cash. And you
Yes.
said, no, it's better. You'll be in a better cash flow position if you buy 4 or 5 properties with a mortgage on each one, something like that. Is that always true? Because, you
Yes.
know, okay.
Yes,
But
it is always
but
true.
Say more. Say more.
The reason I sometimes question that is because you are decreasing, you know, when you have no debt financing, you're in a maximum cash flow position, right? But then if you buy 4 or 5 properties with that comes with debt financing, doesn't that decrease your cash flow position for each property? And how do you know, based upon the terms and how much how much of the property you're financing, how do you know you're going to be in a better position than if you had no debt at all?
Yeah, this is one thing where the numbers really do matter.
Mhm.
So you need
Okay,
to have a
yeah.
calculator, and we have a calculator in our course. Go check it out. So you have to perform a cash on cash rate of return calculation. So if you have $1 million of cash to deploy, as this client did that I met with this weekend, you know, whatever, if you get a 6% cash on cash for that $1 million of cash, you're going to get $60,000 a year. And if you're at an 8%, you're going to get $80,000 per year. And that's how the numbers work.
And you get additional properties that you're getting debt pay down and market appreciation.
Yep. It's counterintuitive for sure, because in the first example here, you're getting almost $900 in cash flow from one property, which seems awesome, but you only have one property. Whereas in the second example, you could have like 4 or 5 of these properties. And if you add up, you know, your $337 in cash flow, that's way more than the $900 in cash flow you'd get from the first example. And then again, you're getting the equity drivers there. At the end of the day, cash flow is not what makes you rich in real estate. It's equity. It's debt pay down and appreciation. Cash flow, you got to say cash flow positive, but cash flow is really a defensive metric. So for us, if we're at a 1% cash on cash rate of return because we maxed out our leverage, but we're at a 50% total annualized rate of return, like we are on, say, our Nicholas Apartments deal, the $23 million deal, that is a 1% cash on cash rate of return deal with a 50% total annualized. We're doubling our money every 2 years on that deal because our debt is so good, because our debt's so good.
Okay.
And the very specific question you asked is that always true? And Nick kind of jumped the gun and said, yes. I would say no, because let's say you had a loan instrument with like 100% interest. Well, then that's not going to be true, because that's going to gobble up all of your cash flow. So you have to run the numbers, but in general, with the prevailing interest rates over the last, say,
if your interest rate is
20
lower than your cap rate.
over the last, say, 20 or even going on 30 years, it has generally been true that leveraged real estate will give you better overall returns. You're absolutely right that it may dip into your cash flow, but it will give you much better overall returns. And that's really where the wealth driver is. It's very hard to break into financial freedom at a few $100s per door per month. It's very easy when you're getting a 28, 30, 50% total annualized rate of return.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. And what I would encourage you to do is just run many pro formas. So a big part of the reason we, purposely have a very simple pro forma calculator is so that people can just run like literally hundreds of different scenarios. Like, well, what if I get a 75% LTV and 80% LTV? What if my interest rate is 5%, 5.25%, 4.75? What if I have a 20-year amortization, a 25-year amortization? Like, you could run all of those in like probably less than 10 minutes and really get some sense of, or what if I pay 165? What if I pay 175? Should I go up to 185? So you're just running these numbers over and over and over, trying to explore all of the different scenarios. And then when you do this, you're able to see that the total annualized rate of return is your most important number. and you really want to keep it cash flow positive. We should like have those in a special
Total
color or
annual
something.
income.
And so long as those two things are favorable, that's our personal investment thesis in a nutshell.
Yes.
Okay, annualized rate of return and cash flow positive.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's what I'm looking at.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Neil, I think you had your hand up.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
Good. I enjoyed the content today, so thank you for doing that as
Yeah.
always. Actually, this topic is pretty relevant to me. I have a good number of short-term rentals, probably like 6 active and 2 more on the way. And I look at my bank account and I thought, okay, I've got my 6 months reserves and then a little extra. So I went to go shopping again, and I was planning on putting 10% down. But the rates for 10% down loans, this is the market we were going to go visit and all that kind of stuff. The rates have shot up to 7%. So to get it down to, something between 4 and 5, they were asking for 2.5, 3.5 points. So it's like $31,000 for that deal. So I got, I didn't want to put like 13% down, and then it's $1 million property. So 13% down, and then basically have 3% just vaporize immediately. And it's a good cash on cash deal. We're looking at like 30% at conservative numbers, 50%, at ideal numbers. So I have my reserves, I have a physician income. Do I roll the dice a little bit and do the 20% down, eat up some of my liquidity, get a 4% interest rate? Not, I don't want to waste $31,000. It's just like not something I'm interested in, like wasting a Camry in just fees plus other closing costs. Or
love
do
that. I love that
or do I-
analogy. You can just see it
Yeah.
driving down the road.
Yeah, exactly. Or do I wait a few more months when I'm in a better position? Maybe I have a cash out refi in progress. I don't know if it's going to actually work out. I'm waiting on appraisal. We'll get bonuses and all that kind of stuff. I just don't. It's like I'm putting myself in a more uncomfortable position than I want it to be. But good deals are hard to find and all that kind of stuff. And
Yep. Before we dive in,
Yeah.
I will say that it's usually not advantageous to buy points. It's something Elaine and I disagreed on, because I was buying points on our loans several years ago to buy down to a 4.75% interest rate. And then we would refi out of that loan like 2 years later. It's like a 7-year payback period on most points. Typically, the first point you can buy at a steeply discounted rate, it's a half or a third of the cost. That's really favorable. But any more than 1 point is almost never a good trade, because once you get to 5 years in a deal, like you've probably gotten to a point where you want to refi. So you never hit that 7-year period where you get your payback period on points. And it's also a cash outlay today, and with the time value of money, for investors such as ourselves, like that money is more valuable to us today than it is tomorrow. So I'll just throw that out there, that if you're trying to buy points to try to make the deal work, the deal doesn't work.
Right. So that's what I'm deciding between is 10% down with points, which I don't want to do, or 20% down, or no deal, just wait.
Yeah.
The 20% is at 4% with no points. It's like actually like a reasonable loan. But it's more money than I wanted to kind of. I wouldn't have gone shopping if I knew I was going to have to put.
Do you have the money?
Down. Yeah, I mean, I have a HELOC, I have some stocks, I have.
Okay. And do you have a?
So I mean, I
particular
have it,
deal
but I don't.
in your sites.
I have a deal.
Yeah, it's a particular deal.
I'm under
Yeah.
contract.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I want to hear the numbers one more time, Neil. And I'll caveat for everyone that Nick and I do not do luxury short-term rentals. So just the sound of it makes me very nervous. And Neil, I've shared this with you many times before, but I'm going to try to look at this just from like straight numbers. But I am not a short-term rental expert. Neil and Nancy Wu and some of the others on this call are the short-term rental experts. But we have a $1 million property.
Right.
That you can bring 100,000 down at a 7% interest rate.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which, I didn't know that till I started looking for lenders after I found the property. I just assumed it was the old algorithm of 3%, which is what I was getting 3 months ago.
Got it. But you have to pay 3% in fees to get that 10% down. Or you have the same, I'm sorry, to what?
To 4.875. percent for
Let's
the
Okay,
interest
drop the
rate.
points out of the.
So you get
Yeah,
both a lower down payment and a lower interest rate for that 3% in fees.
Yeah.
Okay. Or you can do 20% down and get 4% and you have no fees.
Right. And I have probably like, my normal, like I want to have 6 months of reserves. I'd be probably down to 4 months or something like that for 3 months.
Okay.
Are you
so
able to get a second house?
I want to keep, I got this one. Thanks. So you're asking me, should I spend 30,000 to keep 100,000 liquid?
Well, to me, that's like, I just wouldn't do it. Like, I'm not asking that question. I'm asking, should I do the deal at all? So with the 20%, I guess I'm just telling you why I'm not doing, why I went shopping at all, because I thought I could do 10%, but it's not really an option to me at 30,000.
You exhausted all of your lending contacts. Is this the best debt you can get?
Yeah. I tried several. I think just Fannie Freddie made it too punitive to.
Can you get a
do that.
commercial loan that's not regulated by Fannie Freddie?
I don't think anyone's going to do. I think 20% down is pretty standard though, right? For commercial.
Yeah, that's true.
I know
That's true.
there's lenders out there that specialize in short term. I don't know what sort of term.
Yeah, I think they typically want 20, maybe 15, but then the points are back or the rates are higher.
Have you calculated the total annualized rate of return under these various situations?
Yeah, I mean okay, so I can give you a quick update on the cash on cash. So with 20% down, no points, 4%, we're looking at like conservative number, very easily hit, to hit is like 29% cash on cash. And if I change that to 10% and I change my closing cost to 40,000, we're looking at like 36%. Oh wait, hold on, I gotta, 33%. So it's slightly better with 10% down. Normally without the big points, it would be like significantly better.
So with the 10% down, even paying 3% in fees, you're going to make that up in 1 year just from your additional cash on cash rate of return, right?
No, I mean, it's
I don't
the
think
3% difference in cash on cash. So I'd make 10% of it back in 1 year.
Yeah, it would.
The cash on cash return.
What's your total annualized rate of return? I'm not as worried about cash on cash rate of return.
Okay. So I'd cash flow like with the 10% down, I'd cash flow probably like 53,000 a year at the conservative gross revenue, and then at 20%, we're looking at the next. Oh, we're looking at 64,000.
Okay, but what's your total annualized rate of return? Your cash flow, your debt pay down, and your appreciation. I recommend penciling in no more than 4% for appreciation divided by your down payment. Do you have that number for each scenario?
I don't I guess I don't actually calculate it that way, but I should probably. I don't look at the appreciation. I feel like that's icing.
Yeah, that to me, that's
I feel like it's icing on the cake though.
You're definitely, so cash flow is just a prediction too, right? So you, especially in a short-term rental where you can predict what your nightly rate might be, you can predict what your vacancy might be, you predict your maintenance costs, long-term rental, short-term rental, it's all a prediction. It's just a short-term prediction. So it's much easier to predict cash flow than it is to predict appreciation. Your debt pay down is really the only thing that's like locked in because that's in your contract.
Mhm.
You're going to make a certain mortgage payment every month and a certain dollar figure is going to your debt pay down. And then a 4% appreciation, a 4% appreciation across the last 100 years for residential real estate in all non-rural markets has been at least 4%. I would argue that luxury short-term rentals could potentially be outside of that because it's kind of like a new type of real estate. But I think if you have a long-term hold period in mind, that's a reasonable number. You could put in 2%, put in 1%, put in something that feels comfortable to you. We do 4% because of the metric that I just defined. But in my mind, so those are your three wealth drivers: cash flow, debt pay down, and appreciation, divided by your total amount in the deal. In your 10% down, it's actually 13%. And in your 20% down, it's 20%. figure out which one has a higher annualized rate of return, and is it worth it to pay this fee to get an investment that generates a certain return that's favorable to you.
Okay.
That's,
So the
that's
debt
what,
pay down. So the debt pay down, you just use the amortization table to see, and
that's
then
right.
the cash flow I got, and then I just add the 4%, and then just look at
Or
what's
add
better.
1%. If that's what makes you feel comfortable, put in 1%. But you need to figure out what your total annualized rate of return is under these two different scenarios to figure out, is it worth it to let that Camry drive down the road into the sunset because something better is going to be coming behind it, which is a high total annualized rate of return? Or is it foolish to do this because my total annualized rate of return isn't high enough to justify the fact that this $30,000 is just a pure cost? Is the cost worth it is basically what I'm asking.
Right.
I'm not convinced one way or the other yet. If you calculate the total annualized rate of return and email them to me, we can talk about it.
I have a slightly different way to think about it, which is forget about the points. I think those provide unnecessary complexity in our, they're just I would forget about the points. So I would just look at the spread on your rate. So you've got a 3-point spread on your rate approximately. So on a $900,000 note, you're looking at a spread of like 27,000 per year. So you need to put in an extra 100K essentially to do the 20% down to get the discounted rate. And your payback period on that is 3 to 4 years, somewhere in that territory. Any payback period less than 5 years is kind of a no-brainer for me as just a rule of thumb. So I would do the deal with the 20% down, but that doesn't necessarily factor in your opportunity cost. So if you did have the ability to go buy 2 properties with 10% down somehow, then your total annualized rate of return would very likely be higher in that 10% LTV scenario, even at the 7%, as crazy as that sounds. So yeah, you really need that total annualized rate of return, figure to know for sure. And then that's going to be a pure, like there won't be any of this ambiguity about it. The total annualized rate of return will tell you which is the better investment. And I would just forget about the points because they probably don't make sense for you.
And then the liquidity issue is more just a personal risk tolerance. That's harder to get advice for.
That
was my other
is
concern.
replenishable, right? Because you're going to have cash flow from the property. And so as long as it's not, our liquidity goes down temporarily from time to time. And that's the point of having it, is so you have it. So if we're not using it, then I don't see any reason to have it.
Yeah. Stay liquid. I think I don't see short-term rentals having any struggles, in at least the next several years. That's kind of my thought. I think people are still very wary about, booking international flights and those sorts of things. So stay liquid. I know you have a high income to give you a lot of buffer. You have other cash flowing properties that can kind of feed into the overall bucket. So I wouldn't just blast through your liquidity to get the next deal, but knowing what I know about your situation, I think if you have a short-term dip in your liquidity, and by that I mean, do you think you can replenish it in a few months with the cash flow from your other properties and your personal income? Is it worth it to do that deal if it generates this much return for you? Probably.
There's a much bigger item here too for the people on the call. So let me ask you a question, Neil. Does it make sense for Walmart to open another store?
Yeah, they have the efficiencies of operations, and I guess I have that in short-term rentals, but
we don't have to run the math on that one. We know that it makes sense for Walmart to open another store because they've got a lot of stores and they're making a lot of money at it. They're the largest retail corporation in the world, so they should probably open another store. So I don't know much about you, but it seems like you have been competently operating this business. And so anytime someone comes to us and says, hey, I've done this thing really successfully for a while, should I keep doing it? Our answer is always yes. It almost doesn't matter what the numbers are. You should check the numbers, but those qualitative drivers are really the most critical thing. Now, if this was your first short-term rental and you're saying, I heard on a blog that you can make a lot of money in luxury vacation rentals, and I've got this great 7% rate loan lined up, should I pull
on $1 million property?
Yeah, I've never seen it. I've never even visited the market. Should I pull the trigger on that deal? We don't have to look at the numbers on that one either. Our answer is a no. So it really, the qualitative considerations trump everything.
And obviously, this, but stress the deal, high vacancy, lower rent than you expected. I guess those are kind of the two big things to stress, like your maintenance and that sort of thing isn't going to change that much. But stress the deal in as many ways as you can. Really focus on your total annualized rate of return. I like some of the ways, this is why I love these like live deals, because first of all, they're super fun. And we appreciate everyone that has shared tonight. It takes some courage and vulnerability to share a specific deal. But I hope you're seeing that there's multiple ways to think through these things. And Nick and I think very differently. And the answer is like probably somewhere in the middle, right? So there's lots of different ways to think about it. I don't think the deal is dead. I think there's still some real potential. I'd really want to see the annualized rate of return to really know.
Okay, I appreciate. I like asking you guys.
I can tell you
I
that.
like asking you. It's not going to get any better. I like asking you guys because you come from a different perspective. Otherwise, it's a little bit of an echo chamber of the people I already talked to. So thank you.
Yep. We love talking to other people because we like literally, that's a question we ask ourselves every single day. We're married to each other. We're like, oh gosh, I hope we're not an echo chamber. So we're literally just out there talking with other real estate investors. And that's, a big part of the reason we love hearing from other people's deals is what are you guys seeing out there in the market? So we echo that gratitude back to you, Neil. Thank you.
All right. Thanks.
Awesome.
Appreciate the help.
We promised our nanny would be home at 9:15, so we're delinquent again. We just love hanging out with you guys. We could do this all night, which is why we're having our in-person events. We can just spend all day and all evening with you guys for several days in a row. We will wrap up. A couple of you asked about the calculator. That's inside of our course, singlefamilyatscale.com. It's a give what you can model with just a $100 minimum to join the course. We encourage people to give generously. Lots of people give more than the minimum. And we'd encourage you to, because 100% of revenue goes to charity, but our pro forma calculator is in there. There is also a historic community hour that we can upload to our YouTube channel. I think maybe about a year ago or so, we did a community hour specifically on the pro forma calculator. So we'll upload that over the next day or two, and then I'll pop it into the Facebook group, Real Estate at Scale. Otherwise, we have to end somewhere.
Yep.
So this is the moment. Next month in April, I believe we are meeting on April 18th. Rachel, if you could check the calendar and pop that in the chat, that'd be really helpful. I'll pop in to say hello, but I'm going to have a brand new little baby. So we are bringing our director of growth, Riley Brennan. He's kind of our chief property manager, helps with a lot of acquisitions and growth in our company. And he and Nick are going to talk about property management fundamentals. Really important, whether you're self-managing, which maybe some folks on here are because you're working toward real estate professional status, or you're hiring a property manager and you need to know what to look for in a property manager, or you're even doing things like syndications and funds where you're another step removed from the property manager, but you need to understand how that general partner is creating value and how they're managing the assets. So we're really excited to bring Riley on. You guys will love having a chance to spend a few hours with him. He's just a delight to work with and has brought a lot of value to our company. And so we're excited for you all to meet him, but that'll be next month. And then I will hopefully show up and show you my little baby, and then I'll be back in May. Let us know what topics are interesting to you. We have lots of topics that we're always happy to cover, but it's helpful for me to hear what you guys want to hear about. And particularly that we create these presentations like in the week before we do them so that they're very timely. So who knows what's going on in May, but let us know in like late April what you guys want to hear in May for community hour. And that's what we'll put together.
Yep.
Thank you so much, everyone that hung with us for so long. Go get some rest. Enjoy your month. Crush it in Q2 that's coming up here soon. And everyone take care.
Bye.